Chapter 166. But how could he be so assured that his opponent wouldn't overtake him? Without waiting for the paper to be collected, he had the teacher hand it in first. It was still those old words. Everything about this disciple of his was good, but his temperament was too impatient, too condescending. But it was also because Murong Changfeng handed in his paper early that the audience below was like boiling water, their voices loud and dry. Lord Murong has one for sure, haha. Up until now, that woman hasn't even moved her brush. Only now did people notice that Hellion Vivian, who was standing to the side, really hadn't even moved her brush. Her fingers were only nimbly turning those armament components, her thin lips seemed to be smiling, and no one knew what she was thinking. The judge wrinkled his brows and faintly reminded, "There isn't much time left in this competition. I hope that the contestants can hurry up a bit. If they haven't handed in their paper by the time, we'll determine that they've been eliminated." She probably finally knew how to be nervous. Hellion Vivian finally picked up the brush, but her long shapely eyebrows were wrinkled into a ball. That appearance seemed to indicate that this question was very difficult. Huan Mingxiang, who was standing not far away and watching the competition, let out a long sigh. This kind of question is indeed too difficult for a novice armament cultivator. Elder Huan also believes that this competition is won by the superior compound? The figure faintly smiled. This time, I reckon that the superior compound is truly displaying their original strength. However, the people from the inferior compound are also not bad. To be able to compare to the superior compound to this extent, losing a match can't be considered too shameful. There's still the last fifth of time left. The judge looked at the sandalwood that was about to burn out and broke out in cold sweat for Hellion Vivian. But looking at Hellion Vivian's appearance, it seemed that she was still struggling with her brush. The people below the stage were already laughing. What did I say? She'll definitely make a fool of herself. Someone who relies on currying favor with others to come participate in the armament competition. This is originally a joke. Sister Jiao, you should also stop her. Hellion Jiao gently smiled. How can I stop her? Eldest sister has always liked this kind of situation. She was implying that Hellion Vivian liked to be in the limelight. Naturally, the young misses of the officials also heard it. They all picked up their fans to cover the ridicule at the corners of their mouth. The little seventh prince stared at the southeast corner of his body, and found that his third brother's eyes were deeper than ever. Could it be that he had some sort of backup plan? He seemed to have noticed the little one's gaze. Beligaju slowly raised his eyes. The little seventh prince paused for a moment and immediately sat up straight. His round canine teeth were exposed as he stared seriously at the spectator stand. Why did he feel that the woman's expression was very similar to the expression of the dean when he was giving him homework? He didn't like to write either, especially writing a long paragraph of words. Just thinking about it made him feel terrified. Could it be that the woman was so slow because she didn't know how to write? The seventh prince's bald little head fiercely wrinkled his little eyebrows. Then after the competition was over, he must properly get to know this woman. After all, it was simply too difficult to find someone in the academy whose handwriting was uglier than his. The last bit of incense fell to the ground. Pa! Hellion Vivian finally put down the brush in her hand before the incense burned out. Murong Changfeng coldly glanced at her. Your luck is pretty good. He thought that she would definitely be eliminated. He didn't expect that she would actually catch up at the last moment. However, even if it was like this, she would only be a joke. He knew better than anyone how much weight she had. Last time in Armament City, she was merely a blind cat that ran into a dead mouse. This time, when he saw her write the test paper, he could clearly see that she was in a difficult situation. Maybe the answers that were handed in were all randomly made up by her. A person like her was indeed only worthy of that poor and pedantic brat. Only Murong Changfeng looked at the side of her face that seemed to be stained with light under the sun. His hands clenched and he unexpectedly couldn't control himself as he said, Hellion Vivian, I'll give you one last chance. If you turn back, this lord will take into account our past relationship and make you lose less miserably. Ha ha ha, woman, what did I hear? This man actually used this kind of method to make you turn back. Yuan Ming's voice came from the celestial boundary space. His gaze was evil. How about it? Do you want to become the Lord's wife that everyone looks up to? Hellion Vivian indifferently retracted her gaze and looked at Murong Changfeng. Her smiling face was light, as if she was replying to Yuan Ming's words, but also as if she was saying to Murong Changfeng, "This is simply the best joke I've ever heard." Murong Changfeng's back suddenly stiffened. His handsome side profile also became gloomy in that split second. The two people's voices were very small. The others didn't know what they were saying. They only saw them standing side by side. That kind of posture unexpectedly had a somewhat unclear lingering flavor. It can't be. Even now, that woman still can't forget Lord Murong. It's only a short time of waiting, yet she's rushing to talk to Lord Murong. She really has opened our eyes. A young girl who normally liked Murong Changfeng very much sneered. Her words clearly looked down on Hellion Vivian. The person sitting next to her was also from the superior compound. He lightly laughed. I reckon she feels that she's going to lose and is currently asking Lord Murong to comfort her. Lord Murong wouldn't comfort a good-for-nothing. The young girl blew on her red fingers. She clearly came here to make a fool of herself. In a moment when the answer is announced, we'll just wait for her to lose face. Nangong Lai listened to those discussions. Nangong Lai pretended to let out a long sigh. His body casually leaned backwards, his two hands behind his head. His thin lips carried an evil aura. Intentionally or unintentionally, he looked towards Beligaju. AI unforgettable old feelings, ah. It looks like I have to prepare to go on stage in a moment. Love can make a woman completely lose her ability to judge, so much so that she can't distinguish between friend and foe. Captain clearly intends to throw the game. Aju, what do you say? Beligaju was somewhat absent-minded. He slightly leaned his body. His deep eyes flashed with a strange vastness as he sank into contemplation. Suddenly, he crossed his hands and supported his chin. The corners of his mouth slowly pulled out an ice-cold smile. I said you better shut up. After saying this, he stood up. Aju, where are you going? Nangong Lai was excited. Was he going to duel? For the sake of stealing a woman or something? Beligaju glanced back. Even though he was draped in a long windbreaker, one could still feel his tall and straight back. His muscles were distinct and well-built. That pure and resolute ancient aura was displayed on his body. That was the elegance accumulated over the years. He slowly curved his thin lips. His gaze on Hellion Vivian's body emitted a demonically cold light. Chapter 167. Beligaju lowered his eyes, his black hair falling down, making people unable to see his expression. Go get a bird cage. When did you become interested in raising birds? Nangong Lai oddly raised his eyebrows. Beligaju's voice was neither fast nor slow. It's not birds, it's people. Hearing this, Nangong Lai's scalp went numb. No, it can't be what I think it is. Aju flew into a rage out of humiliation, planning to lock up the eldest miss of the Hellion family and raise her. Listen to me, I was just joking. Nangong Lai immediately grabbed Nangongju's arm. His whole body itching to wrap around him, just to hold him back. Captain definitely won't be lenient, did you forget? What she loves the most is money. Who knows what rank that guy Murong Changfeng will be? Beligaju deeply looked at him. Just when Nangong Lai was about to be unable to hold on after being stared at by him, Beligaju finally sat back down, his eyes cold. You're right. Huh. Nangong Lai swallowed his saliva. In fact, he already forgot what he just said. Beligaju extended his hand, wanting to turn the ring on his finger, but discovered that there was a thin piece of white cloth tied there. His black eyes deepened. What she loves the most is money. Who knows what rank the others will be, including him? Just as Nangong Lai and Beligaju were talking, Master Tu Lao on the stage had already started reading Murong Changfeng's test paper. It was written very well, and every reason was very sufficient. The results could be considered excellent. The other masters also thought so, nodding to each other. When it came to Hellion Vivian's test paper, one of the masters didn't even bother to turn it over. The result of the competition was already obvious. What was the difference between looking and not looking? But suddenly, Master Tu Lao actually grasped that roll of paper, his fingers trembling. So it's like this. So it turns out that ferrotungsten can also have this kind of effect, changing the shape of armaments. Why didn't I think of this before? He wouldn't have been so excited if the test paper was just a bunch of random answers. However, it was a logical thought process. Every part of the test paper was placed in a very suitable position by her. It was as if these parts were originally an armament, but after taking them apart, they were then reassembled. Furthermore, each new design was even more amazing than the previous one. What was most inconceivable was that she had actually written an entire page with no less than 8 sets of proposals. Even he could only think of 7 sets at most. This girl actually. What was even more shocking was that she even added a note at the end. There are other solutions, but this brush writing is too confusing. I suggest that the masters change to oral answers in the future. Thank you. There was another plan. How was that possible? The person sitting next to Master Tu Lao was also shocked. They looked at each other in dismay, their eyes trembling. Hellion Vivian. Master Tu Lao muttered this name, his fingers clenching. This person is definitely a genius. I want to go down and see what this girl looks like. The other master extended his left hand, blocking Master Tu Lao. No, Tu Lao, wait a moment. This is a competition after all, we must follow the competition rules. Besides, she is Ji Zun's disciple. Maybe she just happened to know the answer before, and memorized it word for word. Tu Lao was slightly stunned. That's true, Ji Zun, that guy can probably make 10 sets. However, to be able to memorize so many armaments parts, you won't be able to find a second one in White Academy. That girl is definitely not like what others say, a waste. I know this. The Grandmaster nodded his head and stroked his beard. What this old man means is that it's clear that she has won this round. However, as for how strong she is, we still need to see her actual operation, which is the second part of the armament assembly. Haha, your suggestion is good. Tu Lao sat down again, but his eyes were not as calm as before. Everyone looked puzzledly at the 2 masters who were laughing loudly, and frowned in confusion. It must be eldest sister's answer that made people not know whether to laugh or cry. That's why the great masters acted this way. As Hellion Jiao Er spoke, she sighed rather vexedly. Sigh. When the young ladies heard this, they all laughed. What kind of answer do you think she will write? It shouldn't be something like I don't know, ha ha ha. Facing the ridicule from below the stage, Hellion Vivian did not open her mouth to say anything, only twirling the brush in her hand. Even her posture was as languid and clear as if she was taking a stroll in a garden. If it had to be described, then it would be the afternoon sun, beautiful mountains and clear waters, paired with a cup of Earl Black tea. Twirling the brush was very normal, but when you really drank it in your mouth, then you would know what a noble was. Hellion Vivian, she was this kind of person. That kind of carefreeness, as if everything in front of her was just a game. Speaking of which, to her it was indeed so. Parts assembly, she had played with it since childhood. The modern-day K7's process was much more complicated than this. Cold weapon parts to her could be said to be a piece of cake. What's more, when she came to Dragon War Empire, she relied on parts assembly to become rich. Although she might not be able to compare to those masters in other areas, the biggest marketing feature of her shop was from ordinary martial artists to martial families. In other words, no matter what kind of armament parts, good or bad, she had come into contact with them all. Moreover, in her mind there was no clear definition of good or bad. As long as a part was pressed into a suitable position, it could collide and produce unexpected power. Master Bai did not know what Hellion Vivian was thinking, and thought that she was speechless. Facing Tu Sufeng, who was sitting not far from him, he said with a very regretful appearance, "What did I say? Let the principal change the person to go on stage. It seems that the second part of the competition does not need to continue. This is destined to be an elimination round." Tu Sufeng did not respond, only turning his head. He said to Nangong Lai, "You prepare?" When the people from the inferior compound heard this, they lowered their heads. Even the principal said this. It seemed that there was no hope. Lord, I knew it would be this kind of result. The young girl from the superior compound faced Murong Changfeng and smiled sweetly. "You are our Dragon War Empire's most outstanding genius. It would be unreasonable if you don't win." Murong Changfeng knew who that young girl was, and because he knew, he smiled gently. After all, there was profit to be gained. The result is not out yet, let's wait on the side. Although he said this, Murong Chongfeng's appearance was that he was determined to win. Okay. The young girl looked at Hellion Vivian complacently. Hellion Vivian did not even bother to throw her. That young girl clenched her teeth, waiting for the result to be announced. Then she would properly ridicule her. Finally, Master Tu Lao, who was standing at the referee's table, stood up. His gaze surveyed the crowd below. His voice unhurriedly, the winner of the first part of the armament competition. Chapter 168. Murong Chongfeng raised his chin, the side of his face looking incomparably arrogant, as if he'd already anticipated that he would win. He'd already taken a step forward, intending to accept everyone's worship. He didn't expect that Master Tu Lao would actually lower his voice and loudly read out the name Hellion Vivian. Snap! The thing in the figure's hand dropped. Even Huan Mingxiang also didn't anticipate this kind of result. He stood there blankly, simply too late to make any sort of reaction. The smile at the corners of Murong Chongfeng's mouth, in that split second, clearly stiffened in place. He was stunned as he widened his pair of long and narrow eyes. The footsteps he'd taken also stiffened in place. His fingers slightly trembled as he turned his head and faced Wei Wei to look at her. The blood on his face completely drained away. How could this be? How could he lose to a woman with no redeeming qualities? Everyone was stunned by this result. They opened their mouths, forgetting to close them. Right now, the field was so quiet that it was as if even the sound of a pin dropping could be heard. No, it can't be. The one who won was that trash? That young girl who was still clamoring, and Hellion Jiaoer's expressions cracked at the same time. The ridicule that was originally going to come out of their mouths were all swallowed back into their throats. Their cheeks were green and white. It was a wonderful sight. In the midst of everyone's astonishment, Hellion Vivian, dressed in white and blue, slowly walked forward. Her expression didn't change at all. It was still that small face with a smile that wasn't a smile, but at this moment it made people unable to move their eyes away. Her clothes were also very simple, without any matching. Her long sleeves floated in the air. Her ink-black hair fluttered. The contrast between black and white actually brought out a peerless beauty. The spectators stared blankly at this scene. What kind of joke was this? A trash actually defeated Murong Chongfeng. When did this woman become so awesome? Didn't she know nothing? Murong Chongfeng simply couldn't accept this kind of result. He, the dignified Murong Chongfeng, actually lost to a trash who hadn't even touched the slightest bit of armament before. Murong Chongfeng calmed down the undulation in his chest and turned his head to face the judging panel not far away. Masters, I wrote 3 proposals, one more than what you requested. I really don't understand how I lost. Master Tu Lao heard the dissatisfaction in Murong Chongfeng's tone. His white eyebrows slightly wrinkled, and soon after he sighed. This disciple of his was still too proud and arrogant. It's true that you've written 3 proposals, and they're all very good. The great master sitting next to Tu Tian knew that it wasn't a good time for Tu Tian to open his mouth, so he simply took over Murong Chongfeng's words. His voice carried a smile. Lord, you're already very formidable. However, your opponent has written twice as many proposals as you, and every proposal is more outstanding than yours. The implication of his words was that what else was there to be unconvinced about? Murong Chongfeng's face shook, as if he couldn't believe it. Twice as many proposals as mine? Impossible, this is absolutely impossible. Those parts that master gave, at most only 5 proposals can be made into an armament. 7 or 8 proposals, it's simply impossible. Hearing Murong Chongfeng say that it's impossible, the light in the Hellion Jiaoer's eyes changed. She bit her red lips and said, Great Master, is there some problem in this? Even if someone is Grandmaster Zizun's disciple, this kind of unforeseen event shouldn't occur. You're saying that this old man is covering up for Hellion Vivian? That great master's face slightly sunk, and said in an unkind tone, Since you feel that me being the judge is unfair, how about you be the judge? When the Hellion Jiaoer heard this, her face was embarrassed. I didn't say that great master was covering up for anyone, I only felt that perhaps someone tampered. Otherwise, how could that slut possibly win? Enough! At this time, great master Tu Lao, who hadn't spoken until now, coldly opened his mouth. I didn't want to speak because I didn't want your superior compound to be too embarrassed. This result was set by me. If Miss Hellion still has objections, you can also cancel this old man's qualifications as a judge. As he spoke, he looked towards where Great Master Bai was sitting. His voice carried a strong displeasure. So this is the superior compound student that Great Master Bai has always been so proud of. You really have broadened this old man's horizons. If the superior compound students are all like this, then I suggest that the principal should cancel the superior compound as soon as possible. Great Master Bai stiffened. His appearance was as if he couldn't wait to find a hole in the ground and crawl into it. Tu Sufeng smiled gently and didn't reply. Great Master Tu Lao was really angry this time. It wasn't only the Hellion Jiaoer. After everyone from the superior compound heard these words, they all felt as if they'd been slapped in the face. Everyone who was originally still doubting didn't dare to be doubtful at this moment. Great Master Tu Lao was the heir's master, and even he said that there weren't any problems with the competition. Then the one who won was really Hellion Vivian. Tu Lao didn't care about everyone's reaction. He extended his hand and handed the rolled-up paper to the teacher standing to the side. Let him see for himself. The teacher lowered his head and handed the paper that belonged to Hellion Vivian into Murong Chongfeng's hand. Murong Chongfeng looked at those clear lines of thought, concise narration, but every word poked at the key points of the answers. His pupils swayed back and forth. He'd never thought that those parts could be used like this, especially the sixth line that mentioned it. Not only him, perhaps even his master didn't know that the most worthless parts in their eyes would have such a big effect. She really wrote 7 or 8 sets of plans? In the distance, a figure's voice trembled. Elder Huan, why didn't you say earlier that you knew such a martial genius? Huan Mingxiang glared. What do you want this old man to say? This old man didn't know that this girl knew martial arts. This old man only knew that her attainments in martial qi were extraordinary. As for the rest, this old man only saw it today. He was also very gloomy, okay? He'd stayed with that girl for more than 10 days, yet he still didn't know the details of that girl. Heavens, what kind of monsters did the inferior compound take in this year? The figure's mouth said monsters, yet his eyes shined as if he'd discovered a treasure. Huan Mingxiang stroked his chin and muttered to himself. No wonder that brat Tu Su wanted to take on the role of the inferior compound's principal this year. Since he's that one, then the student by his side who chose divination, who could it be? Elder Huan, what are you saying? Who's who? The figure's thoughts were only on Hellion Vivian. Right now he couldn't wait to see what she'd look like when she personally assembled the martial arts. Huan Mingxiang curved his lips into a smile, his eyes carrying a deep meaning. Nothing. I said that what you said was correct. This year's inferior compound took in a bunch of monsters. Murong Chongfeng, who was standing on the stage, heard the sound of a gasp beside his ear. His body stiffened. Did he really lose? Lost to the girl he disdained the most. Chapter 169. Murong Chongfeng pinched the paper in his hand. When he looked at Hellion Vivian again, his eyes carried an unprecedented blankness. That kind of blankness made the young girl who adored him clench her fists in hatred. Her red nails dug into her palms. She glanced at Hellion Vivian and tried her best to maintain her disdain. It's just that she wrote a lot of plans. If I were Grandmaster Zizun's disciple, maybe I could also write this many plans. Who doesn't know how to recite? Whether or not you win depends on the actual assembly of armaments. Although what the young girl said wasn't wrong, the students sitting at the inferior compound really wanted to tell her. Hellion Vivian, that girl, really didn't recite. When she was in class, other than sleeping, she was lying on her stomach. She made the teachers so angry that they didn't expect her to wake up. Who can't recite? Look at how simple she makes it sound. If you have the ability, go up and compete with boss. I guarantee that you won't even be able to recognize all of the armaments. Those people from the good compound already truly regarded Hellion Vivian as their boss. It wasn't only because of this match. As early as in the previous match between the good compound and the inferior compound, they were already shocked by Hellion Vivian's indescribably fast speed. What's more, only those who had come into contact with armaments knew that memorizing so many parts in such a short amount of time, and immediately remembering where they should be placed wasn't as simple as it sounded. In their opinion, These proud sons of heaven from the superior compound couldn't even compare to them. At the very least, when they lost, they admitted defeat. These people from the superior compound only knew how to continuously find excuses for themselves. Wait until boss really makes a move, then they'll be honest. This was the first time that the young girl was looked at with this kind of gaze by the people from the good compound. Putting aside her family background, she was someone who entered the superior compound as soon as she entered the school. Every time she walked out, she was envied by others. Now these people from the good compound had some guts, daring to talk back to her. Then let's look at the actual assembly of armaments. Just as the anger was about to reach a state of mutual hostility, a faint smile came from the center of the field. Hellion Vivian curled her lips into a half-smile, but that smile did not reach her eyes. She slowly walked over, looking more languid and handsome than the average woman. Then she turned her face to the side and moved her slender fingers. With a click, she seemed to have undone something on her right wrist and lazily threw it to the side. Her posture was very calm, and there was an indescribable evil charm in her elegance. Just like the evaluation people gave her in modern times, Hellion Weiwei was definitely the ace of aces. She had a neutral beauty that made people jealous. Not only could she be as warm as the clear sun, but she could also be as handsome as a queen in a painting. Everyone was stunned as they looked at the heavy buckle that she had casually thrown to the side. All of them sucked in a deep breath. Had she been wearing a weighted buckle all along? Wasn't it said that only the students of the superior compound wouldn't be unable to lift their hands due to the weight? If one's cultivation hadn't reached a certain level, it would be impossible to withstand the gravitational pull of the heavy buckle, right? But this woman had actually been wearing it all along, winning from the good compound to the superior compound. Moreover, the difference between her and Murong Changfeng was that she would appear in every match. How did she do it in the end? Even the fine compound's competitor was somewhat inconceivable. In the end, he couldn't help but turn his head and look at Heizei. I really did suffer a crushing defeat. At that time, I shouldn't have been unconvinced. All right, boy, losing to her isn't anything shameful. Heizei punched that person's shoulder and silently thought, wait until you find out that she's the boss of the profound heavens that you worship the most. Then you'll feel even more ashamed. How could that young girl know this? She only saw Hellion Vivian's indifferent appearance and found her increasingly unpleasing to the eye. She clenched her hands, wishing that she could rush up and tear Hellion Vivian apart. Hellion Jiaoer looked at her, leaned over next to her ear and said a few words. That young girl's eyes lit up and she slightly lifted her chin. Since Miss Hellion is so confident, why don't you make all of those plans that you've written? That way we can see whether you really know how to do it, or if you've only memorized the information that Grandmaster Zizun gave you. Cramming and whatnot can't prove anything at all. The competition's time was limited. Even if this slut could assemble armaments, she couldn't possibly make 7 or 8 armaments in the remaining time of half a stick of incense. Moreover, she had to use the same parts. What's more, these parts weren't made of very good tungsten iron. Some of them simply couldn't be used. She actually wanted to see what this slut would do. It's fine if you want me to make all of them. Hellion Vivian smiled. Her eyes swept over to Sufeng below the stage. However, according to the previous competition rules, I simply didn't need to make so many armaments. Now that the superior compounds people have raised an additional request, then shouldn't the prize money after the competition also be doubled? The young girl sneered. Prize money? You should first win before we talk about it. I've never done anything that doesn't get paid. Hellion Vivian curved her thin lips. In the next second, her expression became incomparably fierce. Otherwise, why should I listen to your request? Do you really think that the whole world is your mother, and that you can do whatever you want? The young girl was blocked by Hellion Vivian's words until her entire body started to tremble. She firmly clenched her own hands. Hellion Vivian, don't you just want money? As long as you can truly make all of these armaments, I'll pay. Good. Hellion Vivian gave the final word. The corners of her mouth carried a smile. Then it settled. Nangong Lai looked at this scene and let out a long sigh. Captain Weiwei definitely did it on purpose. Ju, no wonder she became that Hong Luan of yours. The degree of her black-bellied is practically on par with yours. How could she win against someone and still make them pay? Sinister, too sinister. Beligaju didn't speak. His slender legs were slightly crossed. His left hand, wrapped in a white cloth, lazily supported his lower jaw. His pitch-black eyes were like the midnight, beautiful and inconceivably playful. Nangonglai snorted. He knew that the more black-hearted a person was, the more they could arouse Aju's interest. It seemed that their great Captain Hellion wouldn't be able to escape the misfortune of being locked up in a golden cage in the future. It couldn't be helped. Aju was just that wicked. In the past, that group of ministers were still guessing what kind of woman the royal family, who had never been close to women, would like. In the end, they confirmed that their target was someone like Hellion Jiaoer. She looked innocent and unaffected, gentle, a jasper who was untainted by the dust of the world. At that time, he wanted to tell them that Aju's taste was much heavier than what they had imagined. It was just that this man had a misophobia that couldn't stand any woman. If he really had to choose, Aju reckoned that he would like the kind of woman who would reach out her claws at him. Chapter 170. It wasn't because this type of girl was relatively rare, but rather because this man liked to break off the claws of his prey. Nangonglai was suspicious. What would he do if he really did that kind of thing in the future? He reckoned that there would only be two situations. One was that he found the person dirty and kicked the person out halfway through. The other was that he would first remove that person's claws if he found them pleasing to the eye. Whether or not he did it wasn't the main point. Thinking like this, Nangonglai always felt that Captain Hellion's future was really incomparably worrying. The three grandmasters sitting on the judging panel were also worried for Wei Wei. After all, with so many plans, even they wouldn't be able to make all of them within the time it takes to burn half a stick of incense, not to mention Wei Wei, who hadn't obtained any qualifications as an armament master. They always felt that this competition was more or less bullying. If Jizun came back and knew that they treated his disciple like this, he would definitely flip out on the spot. Tu Tian and Yun Xiu glanced at each other. Master Yun Xiu stepped forward to persuade Hellion Vivian. Girl, just like you said, the Academy's competition rules don't require you to make so many armaments. You can completely ignore what other people say. Thank you, Master. Hellion Vivian knew that these old people were sincerely thinking for her, and the smile on her face became more sincere. However, this student has already decided to accept Miss Mu's proposal. Hearing her call herself a student, Yun Xiu changed his previous impression of her and deeply sighed. It's still Jizun, that guy, who has a pair of good eyes. Accepting such a sensible disciple was because they had previously listened too much to the rumors. Alas! Thinking of this, Yun Xiu smiled and continued. Girl, do it well. This old man believes that you can succeed. As a master of the armament assembly, and as well as having inextricable relations with young Master Wu Shuang, Master Yun unexpectedly spoke to Hellion Vivian like this. This made the young girl surnamed Mu even more jealous. She coldly glared at Wei Wei. She actually wanted to see how this slut would assemble a large pile of useless parts. She's just a dead duck who refuses to admit her mistake. Unexpectedly, there's actually someone who believes her. Master Tu Lao stroked his shining white long beard. His voice was neither mild nor mild. Chongfeng, since Miss Hellion has agreed, then you should also follow what you wrote before and make all the armaments you want to make. Otherwise, this competition would be too unfair. He didn't say the last sentence out loud. Firstly, it was because he really didn't want to see his beloved disciple lose face like this. Secondly, since Wei Wei herself had already agreed, he also wouldn't say anything more. Perhaps, in his heart, he also wanted to know whether the plans that Hellion Wei Wei had written on the paper would be effective in the end. Similarly, as an armament master, he couldn't be more clear. Sometimes thinking about it was one thing, but when the parts were actually put together in one's hands, it was another thing altogether. The two people didn't have much time. They both had half an incense stick's worth of time, but Murong Chongfeng only needed to make 3 armaments, while Hellion Vivian needed to make at least 7. However, the people from the superior compound still didn't feel that they'd taken advantage of her. As before, they mocked and ridiculed. Do you guys think that trash can really assemble all these parts together? She's just bragging. If she said she could make one, I'd believe her. 7, and only half an incense stick's worth of time. Even if she wanted to be in the limelight, she wouldn't play around like that. She only wrote it correctly, yet she doesn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. She really is a country bumpkin from the inferior compound who hasn't seen the world at all. She's the same as her mother. The student from the superior compound hadn't even finished speaking when he saw a shadow cover his eyes. Hellion Vivian lowered her eyes to look at her. Her peripheral vision carried an unprecedented chill. I've changed my mind. I don't want the money, but there's one thing, this person. She pointed at the young girl who'd mentioned her mother. The corners of her mouth carried a bloodthirsty smile. I want her to slap herself 10 times. That young girl suddenly stood up. Hellion Vivian, who do you think you are? You're nothing but a trash. This is White Academy. Don't use your city's arrogant and hedonistic behavior here. Hellion Vivian curved her lips into a smile. She suddenly leaned over and grabbed that young girl's collar. Her voice carried a roguish tone. I'm an arrogant and hedonistic hedonist. Otherwise, you guys also wouldn't have raised that request. The competition will continue as usual. As she spoke, she faced Master Bai and looked over. Only when the time comes, your superior compound will definitely lose miserably. If you don't believe me, you can compare. Master Bai clenched both of his hands. As a master of the superior compound, his pressure was even greater than that of the students. For so many years, the superior compound had always been completely superior to every other compound. Not to mention the Dragon War Empire, even in the entire Divine Continent's academies, they occupied an extremely important position. But this kind of superior victory was unexpectedly going to end here with him. He simply couldn't imagine if the superior compound really lost this competition, would he still be able to sit in this position that he just promoted? The superior compound had to win, no matter what kind of price they had to pay. Not only Master Bai, even the other students of the superior compound also thought this way. That's why after Hellion Vivian spoke those words, they all simultaneously looked towards that young girl. This was the so-called top students. In the face of victory or defeat, they display their unprecedented selfishness, only for the sake of winning. Hellion Vivian knew this group of people's characteristics, which was why she'd temporarily change her request. Because what that young girl said just now already touched her bottom line. Her bottom line was very simple. She didn't care if they scolded her, but if they humiliated her family, she didn't mind letting these people know how ruthless her methods were. The young girl looked at that pair of eyes that seemed to be sealed by ice, and subconsciously shrunk her shoulders. How did this woman suddenly become so difficult to deal with, hateful? She originally wanted to ridicule her with a few words, but didn't expect that she'd be forced into a dilemma by this woman. If she didn't agree, when the time came for the superior compound to really lose, she'd become the main culprit. She certainly didn't want to be ostracized by the people of the superior compound in the future. She'd seen the people of the superior compound ostracize others, probably because of their background. They'd never acted like a shrew, grabbing someone's hair when they didn't see eye to eye. They'd only indifferently walk away when you wanted to blend in with them and chat with them. So much so that after they saw you, they disdainfully curled their thin lips. She absolutely didn't want to be treated like that. The young girl clenched her teeth, raised her head and said, "Isn't it just a few slaps? If you really win, this young lady will accompany you to the end." This good-for-nothing was only bluffing. She didn't believe that she could make 7 armaments in such a short time, unless she grew 3 heads and 6 arms. Chapter 171. Not to mention that she didn't believe it, even Murong Changfeng held a skeptical attitude towards all of this. However, Hellion Vivian didn't shrink back at all after hearing what she said. She simply let go of her collar and smiled faintly. Since the conditions have been agreed upon, then let's begin. As she spoke, she tied up her long hair and picked up the armament component in front of her. At this moment her expression was especially serious. Her pair of eyes that were like the night sky were as tranquil as the ocean. It was as if as long as she stood there and slightly smiled, a cool breeze would come. Since the matter had already reached this stage, the teacher announced loudly, "The second part of the armament competition begins now. Will the 3 referees please light the incense?" Pa! As soon as his voice fell, Hellion Vivian moved her hands. Her speed was so fast that everyone didn't have time to react. Even their eyes didn't have any misgivings about this side's movements. Hellion Vivian had already started. This was the first time that she personally assembled an armament in front of all the students. She turned her face to the side, her thick eyelashes slightly drooping down. Her slender and fair fingers didn't seem to be assembling armaments, but rather like a musician playing the piano. Every finger was fully utilized by her to the appropriate position, beautifully and nimbly changing them. The components in her hand also followed her movements, presenting a smooth and flowing line. Apart from the ka-ka sound, everyone simply couldn't see clearly how her fingers moved. The only thing that could be felt was that this scene was dazzlingly beautiful. That kind of natural and unforced movement, as if those armament components were merely toys that she casually picked up. First, when Murong Changfeng had just started assembling, Hellion Vivian's side had already used the first set of plans to assemble those components into an armament. Her thin lips faintly curved. Under the contrast of her white clothes, she actually looked somewhat irresistible. The second armament. Hellion Vivian's palm turned over and a silver whip took shape. Murong Changfeng was the closest to Hellion Vivian, so he was the clearest about how those originally scattered components turned into armaments in her hands. His eyes flickered uncontrollably, and the components in his hand all fell to the ground with a crash. If it was said that when Beligaju won before, the scene was deathly silent, but now these people couldn't take their eyes off it. Following the rhythmic sound, they couldn't help but swallow their saliva. Isn't this too fast? How could he be so fast? Only Master Tu Lao, at the same time as he was amazed, he also carried a trace of regret. This Hellion Vivian was fast, but she was not as fast as the girl he had met at the Phoenix Pavilion. He thought that someone who could come up with so many proposals would be better than that girl. But now it seemed that it was not possible. Saipa, the third armament. Logically speaking, the assembly of armaments would become more and more difficult the further one progressed. After all, the plan was also like this, from simple to difficult. However, this didn't seem to have any effect on Hellion Vivian. On the contrary, it made her pair of eyes look increasingly bright like water, resplendent like the stars. Murong Changfeng looked at the other's exquisite facial features. His heart unexpectedly felt as if it had been ruthlessly plucked by something, sour and numb. Lord! The young girl outside the field looked at this scene and firmly bit her thin lips. Hurry up and pick up your things, ah. Lord had never used this kind of gaze to look at anyone before. That kind of expression, as if he was seduced by the other party, simply deserved to die. Murong Changfeng finally returned to his senses. He bent down and picked up those components. He quickly made the first armament, but he was unable to concentrate his energy. Everyone was stunned. The fourth armament. Hellion Vivian casually fiddled with her own neck and continued to bury her head. The crowd instantly went into an uproar. The fourth one she really already made four. It can't be, Lord just finished one. What about time? The most important thing is time. In a flash, everyone's gaze fell on that half-incense stick that was about to burn out. A nervousness they had never felt before engulfed their entire bodies. The sandalwood incense was about to burn out. The young girl clenched her fists tightly. That pair of eyes stared unwaveringly at the half-incense stick in the distance. That kind of look in her eyes was as if she couldn't wait for the wind to blow a bit stronger and quickly let that incense burn out. Hellion Jiao Er sat right next to her. Her left hand covered the back of Hellion Jiao Er's hand, her voice brewing malice. Don't worry, that woman won't be able to win. It's only 4 armaments, yet she already used up about 4/5 of the time. She simply won't be able to finish the remaining 3 armaments. Just as Hellion Jiao Er said this, a pa sound rang out. The 5th armament was single-handedly placed on the table by Hellion Vivian. Her gaze looked up, as if she was also looking at the length of the sandalwood incense stick. There's still 2 left. There's still 2 left and she'll win. There's already no time, look at that incense stick. Everyone knew that young Master Wu Shuang was the fastest person to make armaments. How much ability did this Hellion Vivian have? She couldn't possibly be faster than young Master Wu Shuang, right? What's more, there wasn't enough time. If she reluctantly assembled these armaments together, and didn't follow the plan she had previously proposed, then she would still lose. But what the crowd didn't expect was that in the next second, Hellion Vivian actually raised her hand and removed something from her wrist. It was the gravity buckle that they had seen before. What kind of joke was this? How many gravity buckles did she actually have on her hand? Pa! Someone noticed that Helly and Vivian switched hands. Look, she's starting to use her left hand as the main one, and her right hand as the support. Her speed seems to have doubled from before. Could it be that she simply didn't use her full strength before? This is too frightening. It was indeed frightening. As a White Academy's great master, Yun Xiu didn't have the confidence that he could do this. Although this was only a beginner's armament assembly, and didn't use any hard to fiddle with 0 years, even him making 4 was already his limit. He'd always thought that Murong Changfeng was a genius. Apart from the armament assembly's young master Wu Shuang, there wasn't anyone who could surpass him in armament attainments. After all, at such a young age, there really weren't many juniors who could catch up to him. But, when he saw today's competition and saw Helly and Vivian's assembly technique, he finally understood what was called a genius among geniuses. How could there be such a powerful girl? And this girl was actually always treated by them as a good-for-nothing waste. The 7th one, she's making the 7th one. Inexplicably, silence appeared in the venue. Ever since Helly and Vivian finished displaying the 6th armament, everyone couldn't help but hold their breaths. Great Master Bai couldn't sit still any longer. With a sudden sound, he stood up from the wooden chair. His eyes looked towards that half-incense stick's worth of time, and the corners of his mouth slowly hooked up into a smile. She won't win because there's already no time. Great Master Bai hadn't finished speaking the word time, when a clear pov sound resounded throughout the entire venue. Like the sound of Sanskrit, it didn't recede for a long time. Chapter 172. Wei Wei's fair hand placed the last armaments on the table. Master Bai looked at this scene in disbelief. Even his figure seemed to be on the verge of collapsing. However, at this time, the allotted sandalwood incense had just finished burning. The incomparably arrogant young girl's face suddenly turned deathly white, forcibly retreating a large step, almost falling onto her seat, as if her soul had been sucked out of her body. That waste actually made all of them. How could it be like this? Lost. The heir actually really lost. Furthermore, this was under the premise that the opponent had to make 7 armaments. The young girl recalled the promise she had made before, and unexpectedly had a kind of unspeakable regret. Helly and Vivian didn't look at her, and according to the competition rules, placed all 7 armaments on a tray, letting the teacher take them over, and let the judges appraise them. Yun Xiu restrained the nervousness in his heart, and lightly picked up the first armament. Just as he was about to look, he saw Tu Tian, who was sitting beside him, suddenly stand up, his face carrying an indescribable excitement. That young girl couldn't see Master Tu Tian's expression clearly, and thought that there was still a way to turn things around. She lifted her eyes and said, "Master Tu Tian, is there something wrong?" Hearing this, everyone was sluggish. In such a short amount of time, making 7 armaments in one go, it was indeed impossible to avoid making mistakes. Could it be that there really was something wrong? The students of the good compound all looked towards Master Tu Tian. What they didn't expect was that the old man unexpectedly seemed to have discovered some rare treasure. His voice carrying excitement, "Soaring flames, this armament is actually soaring flames." Soaring flames? After hearing these 4 words, Yun Xiu suddenly turned his head, and snatched the armament from Tu Tian's hand. His eyes also started to sway. It really is soaring flames. How is this possible? We obviously only provided ordinary parts. How could it reach such a high attack power? Hey Yun Xiu, what are you snatching for? This old man still hasn't finished looking. Tu Tian unhappily pushed away his good friend, and touched the outline of that armament again. It's the mechanical position. She changed the original mechanical position of this part. At this point, Tu Lao realized that the treasure in his hand had been snatched away, and he immediately became furious. Everyone looked on blankly as the 2 masters, who had always been calm and steady, unexpectedly, for the sake of an armament, fought over it. Immediately, they looked at Wei Wei, who was standing on the stage, with some disbelief. What kind of armament did she actually make? Flames soaring to the heavens. Tu Sufeng's voice slowly rang out from the corner of the arena, giving people a kind of tireless gentleness. Attack power 100%. Defense power 100%. able to gather the martial chi in a martial artist's body at one point, transforming into wind, resisting fire. What? 200 martial cultivators? What this woman made was a double-hundred armament. Listening to Tu Sufeng's explanation, everyone felt somewhat dizzy and confused. For a moment, they actually felt that this wasn't some inter-school competition at all, but rather a national armament competition. Although they didn't have a special understanding of martial cultivation, they were still martial artists. Although they weren't familiar with the scientific names of martial cultivation, they clearly knew what offensive and defensive power were. Whether or not an armament was good or not, these 2 points were the most important. Right now, this flame-soaring sky that Hellion Vivian made. Not only was its offensive and defensive power extraordinarily high, it could even resist fire in battle. This was simply comparable to the armaments that young Master Wu Shuang made. Hellion Vivian, was she really still that trash? Involuntarily, everyone's eyes trembled as they looked towards the young girl standing on the stage. She was only 15 years old, and hadn't received any professional training in martial cultivation. She couldn't even ignite a crystal ball, yet her attainments in martial cultivation surpassed young Master Murong. If she also possessed martial chi, how terrifying would that be? Everyone didn't even dare to think about it. Hellion Vivian's reputation as trash was thoroughly broken on this day. However, no one would have guessed that not long after, she would appear in front of everyone with a different appearance. At that time, people would know what was called a true genius queen. The result of the competition is already very clear. Great Master Yun Xiu smiled as he stood up. That smile on his face was enough to see how happy he was. With one hand behind his back, he waved towards Hellion Vivian with the other. The winner, please come to the stage. Hellion Vivian smiled faintly as she walked forward, but heard a clang. Great Master Tu Lao, who was originally standing to the side, instantly dropped the teacup in his hand and shattered into pieces. Girl, why are you here? Tu Lao's presbyopic eyes opened wide, and even his voice became abnormal. Your name is Hellion Vivian? Hellion Vivian nodded her head, and casually spoke with the courtesy of an old man. Elder Tu, long time no see. Tu Lao took a step forward, as if he wanted to hold Hellion Vivian's hand. Unexpectedly, he spoke somewhat incoherently. You don't know how long this old man has been searching for you in the capital after we parted at the Phoenix Pavilion. I've turned the entire city upside down, but still couldn't find your shadow. The 9-tune silver snake you made last time was simply too amazing. Can you make another one for this old man? This old man still has a lot of parts here. You can use them as you please, use them as you please. Use them as you please? Yun Xiu looked at his good friend in astonishment. One must know that although Tu Lao's armament parts couldn't compare to their armament guilds, they were still very rare in the Dragon War Empire. A person who viewed armament parts as his life actually let this girl use his things as she pleased? Moreover, from Tu Lao's words, he seemed to have seen this girl somewhere before. Wait a minute. That 9-tune silver snake was made by her? Yun Xiu also shouted loudly. Tu Lao nodded his head again, and laughed loudly, very cheerfully. Everyone was somewhat at a loss. Why did it seem like these two grandmasters had previously seen Hellion Vivian's prowess? Only the figure of Murong Changfeng, who was still in the arena, shook fiercely. He looked at Wei Wei with an unprecedented shock in his eyes. He didn't expect that the genius among geniuses that his master couldn't forget was actually her. Ah, I remember now. In the good courtyard, there was suddenly a student from the armament department who knocked his own head, with an appearance of sudden realization. At that time, Boss also participated in that armament competition at the Phoenix Pavilion. At that time, she also just went in and came out. We thought that she didn't know anything and was driven out by Grandmaster Tu Lao. Looking at it now, it wasn't that Boss didn't know anything, it was clearly that her speed was too fast. That's why she could come out so quickly. No wonder until now, we still haven't found the champion of that competition who left after receiving the silver. As it turns out, Boss never told anyone that the winner was her. Chapter 173. Silence. A silence that had never existed before. As if their breathing had been stifled, everyone was unable to utter a single word. As it turned out, this woman didn't rely on currying favor with Grandmaster Zizun to get her position. She really had already learned martial cultivation a long time ago. And Grandmaster Zizun definitely knew about this place. That's why he accepted her as his disciple. Hellion Jiaoer knew that Hellion Vivian went to participate in that martial cultivation test at the Phoenix building. Not only did she know, she even met that slut on the streets. But she never would have thought that the person that made Grandmaster Tu Lao flip the entire Beijing city upside down to find was actually her. Hellion Jiaoer's face turned green. Her fingers continuously clenched. Damn it! Since when did this bitch become so powerful? Why didn't she notice it at all? Grandmaster Tu Lao didn't care what other people thought, his eyes shining as he waited for Hellion Vivian's answer. How is it, girl? Let's wait for the competition to end first. Tu Lao's eyes landed on Hellion Vivian's body, while Hellion Vivian's eyes landed on the pile of shiny silver. Our inferior compounds people are all poor, we're still waiting to use money. Poor. After Heizei heard this word, he almost spat out the tea he drank. According to what he knew, their shop's daily turnover was already more than 100,000 taels of silver. How could Hellion Vivian, the big boss, not know? Cough cough, you're right, this old man was too excited and actually forgot about this matter. Tu Lao lightly laughed as he raised his head. According to the school's rule of 2 out of 3, this old man announces that in the competition between the superior compound and the inferior compound wins. Pung! Grandmaster Bai finally couldn't hold on any longer. His entire person sitting back on the wooden chair. His previous complacent appearance was nowhere to be found. He reached out to cover his face, watching Tu Sufeng lead the inferior compound students towards the stage. He was still as refined as jade, his appearance as if he was in control of the universe. Yuan Lingxian, whose 5 viscera and 6 bowels still hadn't recovered from the beating, watched this scene with bloodshot eyes, his teeth creaking as he gnashed them. He simply couldn't accept that they were actually defeated in seconds by someone from the inferior compound. So much so that they lost all face. I'm not convinced. Yuan Lingxian stood up. When he looked at Beligaju, he wished he could tear him to shreds on the spot. I was merely shaken off the stage. If this wooden stage was large enough, I wouldn't necessarily have lost. Beligaju didn't even stop his footsteps. The indifferent look on his face clearly said, I don't care if you submit or not. Instead, it was Nangong Lai who sighed sinisterly at the side. Brother, look at the trouble you've caused. I thought you would beat young Master Yuan to the point where he wouldn't even be able to get up. Why did you show mercy? Beligaju glanced back, his expression indifferent. Young Master Yuan? Huh. Nangong Lai shrugged. Beligaju raised his eyebrows. Who's that? Yuan Lingxian. I just finished competing with you, and you've already forgotten about me. Nangong Lai held back his laughter and pointed at Yuan Lingxian, whose expression was extremely tangled. Beligaju made an "oh" sound, his lips curling into a smile that wasn't a smile. Don't you think that for a person like him, rather than killing him, it would be better to let him live? That way, he'll always remember what it feels like to lose, making him feel even more uncomfortable? Was he saying that from beginning to end, he was letting him win? Yuan Lingxian was thoroughly enraged. He wanted to rush onto the stage, but was stopped by the students on the side. Young Master Yuan, calm down a bit. If you cause a ruckus at this time, it'll be considered a violation of the Academy's rules. The dean will punish you. Yuan Lingxian was so angry that his face was distorted. He gasped for air in large mouthfuls, as if he was doing his best to suppress the anger in his chest. Hellion Vivian looked at his face and immediately felt that his deskmate's words weren't wrong. This kind of person letting him win a round was even more unacceptable than killing him. However, it was obviously already over. His deskmate still wanted to say the truth. This person really is sinister, too sinister. Hellion Vivian glanced sideways at Beligaju's perfect and flawless face, her gaze carrying a trace of inquiry. Beligaju naturally sensed her gaze. When he looked back, the corners of his mouth were already raised into a light smile that could merge with all things in the world, clean like an angel's. What's wrong? Nothing. Maybe she was thinking too much. Hellion Vivian faintly smiled. Let's receive the award. After receiving the award, we'll go drink a big round. Beligaju responded with a good. His eyebrows were like ink as they quietly spread to his line of sight. The corners of his lips curved in a deep and unfathomable smile floated with faint traces of light and shadow. Drink. That's right. If you drink too much, you can seize the opportunity to do something, heh. The competition within the academy finally came to an end. This was the first time in the 100-year history that the inferior compound had won the championship. As for the superior compound, even if they were unwilling, they could only rank second. The matter of Helian Jiaoer and Murong Changfeng entering the battle spirit forces was thus dropped. There was no more room for discussion. Helian Vivian took the award and walked off the stage. Her gaze indifferently swept over the young girl who wanted to escape. Miss Mu, it seems like there's something you forgot to do. That young girl's shoulders suddenly stiffened. She slowly turned her head and looked at everyone's gazes. She had no choice but to raise her arm. Slap. The sound of a slap was incomparably crisp. Helian Jiaoer's gaze turned. She extended her hand and pitifully pulled on Helian Vivian's long sleeve. Big sister, she only spoke out of turn. It's not a big crime. Why do you have to make it so difficult for her? It's not a big crime. Helian Vivian laughed very, very hard. Then is it that right now, when I insult your mother, Madame Su, you also feel that it's not a big crime? Helian Jiaoer choked until her fingers stopped. Helian Vivian's expression was indifferent. Helian Jiaoer, go back and tell that good mother of yours. All of this is only the beginning. That's right. The enmity of killing her mother, the pain of seizing her family. She still hadn't reported it. Now what was she doing? It was only the first step. Helian Jiaoer tightly clenched her hands, but couldn't say a single word of rebuttal. Because some family matters were only known to themselves, it wasn't suitable to be spread out in the open. Helian Vivian didn't care about her reaction. She unhurriedly straightened her sleeves. Looking at that young girl's slightly red cheeks, she smiled faintly. Miss Mu, remember Helian Vivian, have always been one who doesn't offend people if they don't offend me. If they offend me, I'll cut the weeds and eliminate the roots. Moreover, that year, if it wasn't for Taisher Mu's memorial, her mother wouldn't have died with blood in her mouth. Don't think that because she was young, she didn't remember anything. On the contrary, the younger she was, the more she remembered how these people treated her and her mother. It was still that old saying, all of this was only the beginning. Next, she would take back what was originally hers little by little. Chapter 174. That wretched slut. As soon as she returned to her room, the Helian Jiaoer swept all the decorations on the wooden table to the floor. The servant girl knelt on the floor, not daring to get up. The Helian Jiaoer clenched her fists, her sharp fingertips sinking into the white handkerchief in her palm. Her eyes showed unprecedented malice. According to the academy's custom, every year, 2 of the best students from 2 courtyards will accompany the retired emperor to the hidden spirit temple to burn incense and pray for blessings. Go back and tell mother. Let mother think of a way to free herself and go with the retired emperor. I want to see if that little slut can continue to be so arrogant when mother comes. The servant girl hurriedly bowed her head, hurriedly answered yes, and retreated. But the Helian Jiaoer's eyes showed unprecedented malice, as if they were covered in arsenic, and a storm was coming. She must thoroughly remove that little slut before the 3rd prince chooses the princess consort. She must not let His Highness discover her martial talent. Night. The restaurant in the Commerce Courtyard was very lively. A group of people were gathered here, celebrating today's victory. Helian Vivian originally only planned to drink a little, but after she accepted a group of younger brothers, everyone came to toast her. Helian Vivian has never been the kind of person to be restrained by trifles. Moreover, in the modern era, after she and her brothers completed a mission, they would always randomly find a place to drink black beer on the streets of Germany and party all night long. So in reality, Helian Vivian's alcohol tolerance was not bad. However, she misjudged the aftereffects of the ancient white wine boss. Come, come, come. Let me toast you again. A very heroic youth raised a cup with one hand and scratched the back of his head with the other. I misunderstood boss before, please forgive me. Helian Vivian let go of the hand that was supporting her forehead. There was not the slightest trace of drunkenness on her face. She reached out and touched the youth's cup, then raised her head and drank the rest of the fine wine. In any case, today was a happy day, so she could drink as much as she wanted. This was the first time since Hellion Vivian came to this strange world that she felt the passion of the modern world had returned. In fact, when she first arrived at the Dragon War Empire, she didn't want to look so indifferent on the surface. When she was in the modern era, she didn't taste what kinship was. She didn't expect that it would be even more thorough in ancient times. It was precisely because of this that the memories imprinted in this body made her so worried. Her grandfather, her mother. If it weren't for those people, she would have been able to have these things that she had always dreamed of. She was not the real Hellion Vivian, but she had the same experience as Hellion Vivian. In modern times, her father was just like her scumbag father. He only knew how to use women to climb up the social ladder. Once he had climbed to the top, he would kick the women aside. But her mother wasn't that strong. After learning of her father's betrayal, she suffered from depression. Every day she lived in pain. At that time she was still young. Her father brought a woman who was almost a generation younger than him to the house. She could only watch, unable to do anything. She knew that feeling was very painful. Her mother was afraid that the depression would hurt her, so she simply locked herself in the room. Every day, she stood under the railing on the second floor, tiptoeing to see her mother. But she was pulled to the side by that woman and ruthlessly slapped a few times. That woman ran to her father and said that she was a lunatic like her mother. Her father didn't distinguish between right and wrong and directly sent her to boarding school. Other than a pitiful amount of living expenses, he didn't give her anything more. At that time, Hellion Vivian understood what hatred was. She used all her time to study, trying to change all of this. She remembered very clearly that when she was in elementary school, her classmates organized a summer camp. She was the only one left among the teachers. The conditions were not very good at a rural elementary school in the United States. Above her head, an old electric fan rotated and hummed a melody. And what she wanted to thank was that at that moment, she met someone who could change her fate. The successor of the Tang sect, young Master Tang. Young Master Tang also suffered from depression, the kind of depression that could be seen through at a glance. He never spoke to others, but he was a top genius. Who would have thought that an 8-year-old child could actually use a computer to hack the system that the United States was most proud of? However, this child was a true Chinese. Hellion Vivian seemed to have found a group in an instant. She also wanted to become such a person because only by becoming stronger could she protect the people she wanted to protect. At a young age, she made a decision. She followed young Master Tang to Chinatown and found old Master Tang. She fearlessly said that she wanted to join the Tang sect. Old Master Tang was still hesitating. After all, her identity was special. However, young Master Tang didn't even raise his head and said, "Okay." From then on, she became one of the 18 shadows of the Tang sect. She was the ace of the aces and never failed. And the first thing she did when she became an adult was to buy all the shares of her father's company and go home to pick up her mother. Unfortunately, no one could wait for her for 8 years. Her mother was long gone, all because of her treacherous father and that venomous mistress. They were afraid of public condemnation, so they never let her mother out and even wanted to send her away. Therefore, she hated her scumbag father and Mrs. Su more than Hellion Vivian herself. The rain fell. Hellion Vivian also fell into a light sleep as she reminisced. Probably because she drank too much, the emotions that were originally well hidden surged out in an instant. Vaguely, Hellion Vivian felt something push aside the hair in front of her forehead. She frowned and turned her head to the other side. She heard a sigh beside her ear. Hellion Vivian wanted to open her eyes, but she was pulled deeper by the alcohol. Finally, someone helped her up. The smell of sandalwood mixed with the smell of mint had a hypnotic effect that made people want to fall. She tilted her head and fell into an unknown chest. When the person who made the toast saw this, he wanted to stand up and help Hellion Vivian over, but he didn't expect to be frozen in place by Beligaju's gaze. That gaze was extremely cold, as if he dared to touch Boss, this man would take his life. "I'll send her back." Beligaju's voice was calm and emotionless. But inexplicably, they didn't dare to reject him. It had been like this ever since they made the toast just now. They clearly wanted to get this man drunk, but every time, when the wine glass was about to be handed to him, they couldn't help but feel their hearts tremble. They abruptly turned a corner and sent it to Boss. This was too fucking strange. This man clearly looked very elegant and intellectual, and he had a faint smile on his face from beginning to end, without a trace of displeasure. But they just felt their scalps go numb. Don't ask them why. Chapter 175. Master, where are we going? Originally, according to His Highness's habit, he would take a bath at this time. But today, Shadow raised his head and looked at the person in Beligaju's arms. He couldn't help but be slightly stunned. That was a woman? Shadow almost doubted if he had seen wrongly. He rubbed his eyes hard. In the eyes of outsiders, His Highness had always been elegant and noble like a god. After all, he still had the halo of a saint above his head. But only Shadow knew how cold and unapproachable His Highness was when there was no one around. Especially when he disguised himself and entered White Academy. He seemed to be politely wandering in people's eyes, but in fact, no one entered his world. Innate indifference, this was the real His Highness. One year when receiving foreign guests, the princess of the neighboring country also got drunk and insisted that His Highness personally send her off. That princess was indeed a bit rude and unreasonable. She didn't listen to anyone, and even took the opportunity to wrap herself around His Highness's arm. The next day, His Highness set up a plan to let that princess marry into the most deserted courtyard. The reason was because His Highness couldn't stand that his favorite clothes were stained with the smell of alcohol by that princess. At that time, the retired emperor was so angry that he almost ordered people to hold His Highness down and give him a good beating. However, other than himself, who served His Highness all year round, only the retired emperor could see through his scheme. In short, the retired emperor was reluctant to punish His Highness, so he pulled His Highness to his side and taught him earnestly. His Highness listened from beginning to end, and finally indifferently curved his lips. A woman who rubbed against my body, Imperial Grandfather wants me to be polite to her? I didn't kill her, that's good enough. However, His Highness unexpectedly took the initiative to hug a woman today. If this was in the past, Shadow would hardly dare to believe it. When Beligaju carried Hellion Vivian through the door, his fingers supported the side, as if he was afraid of hurting her in his arms. Shadow was just about to step forward to help support Hellion Wei Wei's body when Bailey Jiaju's cold eyes flashed past. Shadow retracted his hand as if he'd been cut, and respectfully retreated to the side. Beligaju retracted his gaze and said faintly, "You may leave." Shadow originally wanted to stay at the side and take care of Hellion Vivian. After all, His Highness had never taken care of anyone before. But when he saw Beligaju's hand wrap around the back of Hellion Vivian's head and gently lift her up, Shadow silently retreated to the side. "Aju, why did you leave halfway through the wine?" Nangong Lai, with an incomparably evil smile, walked over from afar. Looking at the person in his embrace, the corner of his eyebrows raised. "Huh? This woman's face looks pretty good like this." As he spoke, Nangong Lai wanted to reach out and push aside Hellion Vivian's bangs to take a closer look. Unexpectedly, there was a loud bang. The wooden door in front of him suddenly closed. Before Nangong Lai could react, he choked on a mouthful of dust. "Fuck. Aju, my face is ruined." However, Nangong Lai was at a loss. Why wasn't he allowed to go in with them? It was obvious that Aju didn't have any ability to take care of people. Also, where's Shadow? Nangong Lai looked left and right. Just as he was about to leave, the wooden door in front of him opened again. In front of him was Beligaju's handsome and cold face. "Go get a basin of hot water, ? Nangong Lai's face was full of question marks. Nangong Jiaju thought for a moment and added, "And a towel. Do I look like your bodyguard that much?" Nangong Lai roared. Nangong Jiaju leisurely cracked his own wrist. "Go or not?" "Go." Nangong Lai swallowed his saliva and shifted his gaze away. As he walked, he muttered, "That's why I hate people who only know how to use martial chi to threaten people the most. Simply shameless." But to tell the truth, Nangong Lai also didn't do such a thing as fetching water. Just to find a wooden basin, he sent 3 shadows. In the end, he got a basin of hot water and proudly knocked on the door. "Look, I brought the hot water." Bang. Another sound came from the door. Nangong Lai maintained the position of holding the basin in the rising dust. His hands were already empty, leaving only a miserable expression. The bed in Hellion Vivian's boudoir was very big. Her long black hair spread out on the bright red sandalwood, giving people a kind of indescribable beauty and enchantment. Beligaju glanced at her and sat down on the edge of the wooden bed. He extended his arm and twisted the white towel. His shoulders and back extended extremely powerful curves. He leaned to one side and helped Hellion Vivian wipe the side of her face. His long eyebrows wrinkled, as if he was very unaccustomed to this kind of thing. As if she felt someone beside her, Hellion Vivian turned her body. Unexpectedly, her cheek touched Beligaju's arm. That trace of cool touch made her involuntarily rub against it. Long eyelashes covered that pair of always smiling eyes. Light-colored thin lips slightly pursed. Black long hair scattered all around, making her whole face indescribably soft. Drops of sparkling and translucent water slid down her cheeks and finally hid under her pure white robe, causing people to daydream. Beligaju felt as if he had been scratched by something. It was a little itchy and there was an unknown thirst. His gaze fell on her light and soft lips. His eyes darkened. His slender fingers followed Hellion Vivian's cheek and gently pressed down. The touch was the same as in his memory. A burning sensation spread from his fingertips to his chest, as if something was swelling up. Beligaju's eyes darkened even more. This made him look more dangerous than usual. In the quiet room, one could hear Hellion Vivian's light breathing. Then even the sound of breathing stopped. Because Bailey Jiaju leaned over, his pair of dark eyes became more and more unfathomable as his thin lips touched her moist lips. Oh. Hellion Vivian gently wrinkled her long, shapely eyebrows. Beligaju directly stuck out the tip of his tongue and gently traced the beautiful shape of her lips. That soft and smooth touch made him almost forget to leave. He continued to linger for a while. Understanding the principle of stopping while he was ahead, he stood up with a faint smile and looked at her slightly wrinkled clothes. He quickly reached out and pulled off Hellion Vivian's robe that reeked of alcohol. He glanced at her white collarbone. He saw it more clearly than that day in the forest. Her skin was warm and slightly cool like jade. It was porcelain white without any blemishes. It was as if a light touch would print a red mark. Bailey Jiaju's eyes followed her neckline downwards. His slender fingers unhurriedly undid the cloth around her waist. Not the slightest trace of politeness. He tore open that eyesore of a robe. Under the messy pure white clothes, other than her black hair that was as soft as ink, Wei Wei's entire body's skin seemed to be suffused with a layer of soft light. Her delicate and beautiful collarbone, her slender and perfectly straight legs, were unreservedly presented in front of Bailey Jiaju's eyes. Chapter 176. Nangonglai smiled evilly. This is a secret that only I know. Elder He is actually He Zai's maternal grandfather. He Zai's parents had an accident outside the Great Wall, so he was brought back to be raised. Afterwards he followed Elder He's surname and became He. A Jew, why are you suddenly asking this? After he finished speaking, Nangonglai felt his scalp go cold. Not because of anything else, but because even though the smile on Beligaju's lips didn't diminish, his eyes darkened, as if he couldn't see the end of it. The next morning, the sky was clear and boundless. Early in the morning, each courtyard received the news to go to the hidden spirit temple, but this time was different. Every year, the students accompanying were the winners and the second-place finishers, but this year the retired emperor personally selected candidates. There were people from each courtyard: Hellion Jiao, Murong Chongfeng from the superior courtyard, He Zai from the fine courtyard, and so on. Hellion Vivian was also on the list of candidates. Only she didn't really want to go, so her movements weren't that fast. After lazing around in bed for a while, she stood up and discovered that her clothes were different from yesterday. Who helped her change into her nightgown? Hellion Vivian knocked on her own head. Her first reaction was to check her own body, but there was no abnormality. It seems that she thought too much. However, in the future she couldn't drink so much wine anymore. This kind of unconscious feeling, experiencing it once was enough. This wasn't the modern world. Even though she had Yuan Ming to protect her. But under normal circumstances, Yuan Ming would also stay in the Xuanhuan space to cultivate. Unless Hellion Vivian really encountered some kind of attack, then he would sense the danger and come out. What was strange was that Yuan Ming, this guy was obviously a demon, but he was more punctual than her, a human. Every day, he would sleep as soon as the sky turned dark, and would wake up as soon as the sun rose. He also liked to eat noodles. He was simply a typical homebody, not at all in line with his fluttering silver hair. Hey Yuan Ming. Nothing happened to me yesterday, right? In order to avoid remembering anything, Hellion Vivian said while rinsing her mouth. Yuan Ming lazily yawned. What could have happened to you yesterday? You slept like a dead pig and you even hugged me in the middle of the night. Woman, let me tell you the truth. Although you are quite interesting, I don't have any thoughts towards you. Thank you, but I don't have any thoughts about you. Hellion Vivian spat out the mouthwash in her mouth. Also, I'm hugging the ancient book, not you. Yuan Ming coldly snorted twice. He looked at himself in the mirror and asked, compared to your desk mate, this senior is actually not that much worse. What do you mean? Hellion Vivian grabbed the towel and frowned. Why is there a wet towel here? Yuan Ming raised his chin slightly. Appearance. Of course. Hellion Vivian casually placed the towel on the wooden rack and said, You're still far from it. Wake up, will you? Stop dreaming. My deskmate's appearance is not something you can achieve. What are you thinking about? Although Yuan Ming's appearance was also not bad, after seeing her deskmate's face so many times, she was immune to everything. That man was perfect from the beginning to the end. Hellion Vivian almost suspected that he had cheats on him. Hellion Wei Wei was washing her face while ridiculing him in her heart. She was absent-minded and somewhat slow. Yuan Ming paused for a bit. The words that he originally wanted to say were swallowed back into his stomach. Since you don't know how to make this senior happy, then this senior won't tell you that you were almost eaten by a certain someone. Every time the young ladies from influential families went out, they had to make a lot of preparations, including what kind of clothes to wear, what kind of jewelry to wear, and what kind of hairstyle to match. Everything had to be tried several times. Even the rocking fan in their hands had to be several times more exquisite than the one made by others. What made these young ladies excited was that this time, not only was the retired emperor going to the hidden spirit temple, even the imperial family was called out. Dressed in military attire, he was like a deity at the front of the group. As the retired emperor's most beloved grandson, when his imperial grandfather went to burn incense, he naturally had to go along with it. But the reason for this was that the retired emperor still had other thoughts. Otherwise, he wouldn't have chosen so many young ladies to go out with him. Moreover, it was said that this time they were going out of the courtyard, and they had to stay at the hidden spirit temple for one night. All the basic necessities had to be taken care of there. Therefore, no matter if it was the young ladies or young masters, they all brought their own maids and attendants. On the contrary, Hellion Vivian was relaxed. She only brought a change of clothes and didn't bring anything else that was useless. In fact, from her point of view, those young ladies from influential families were doing some useless work. Since the third prince was leading the group, he would naturally be at the front and wouldn't have time to see what clothes they were wearing. However, speaking of which, since the last time they signed that contract, she and the third prince hadn't met. Since they met this time, they could talk about the matter of armament components. Because the journey to the hidden spirit temple wasn't close, the retired emperor had prepared carriages for the students early on. If the men were willing to ride a horse, they could ride a horse. If they weren't, they could ride a carriage. The servants served them attentively. The carriage was covered with plush cushions, making it very comfortable to sit on. But since ancient times, men were hot-blooded. Most of those men didn't ride a carriage. Instead, people rode on war horses. Looking at them in a row, each one was extraordinarily handsome. It made those young ladies from influential families, who slowly walked over with their maids, blush. Hellion Vivian originally wanted to ask her deskmate what happened yesterday, but when she looked around, she didn't see the shadow of her deskmate. Her long eyebrows couldn't help but wrinkle. She was the only one from the inferior compound who was selected? Elder sister Jiao Er. Look at her looking around. She's really too petty. Standing next to Hellion Jiao was the daughter of the Liang family, who had recently become quite powerful in the capital. She was also a member of the fine compound. Because she had been in secluded cultivation, she didn't participate in this time's exam. Some people said that if she had participated, the current situation wouldn't be like this. However, the competition was already over. No matter what they said, it was futile. Hellion Jiaoer patted her hand and walked in small steps towards Hellion Vivian's direction, wearing a light-colored 7 layers of brocade silk gauze. Her eyes hid a poisonous intent that only Hellion Vivian could see. Elder sister, don't be so sloppy in a moment. If by any chance you do something and make the retired emperor angry, that would be disastrous. Hellion Vivian lazily lifted her eyelids, neither cold nor indifferent. It was as if she didn't put these two people in her eyes. Hellion Jiaoer coldly snorted. Her long skirt swayed, bringing out a terrifying arc. Even if she was more powerful in martial arts, so what? If she didn't know how to get along with people, and didn't know how to scheme in a fight, this little slut would still die. Hellion Jiaoer lifted her eyes. Her peripheral vision slowly slid past a carriage not far away. Her body brushed past a young lady from the good compound who was born of a concubine. The smile on the corner of her mouth became increasingly intense. It seemed that mother had already arranged everything. This time she was going to Hidden Spirit Temple. She wanted to make sure that Hellion Vivian would never be able to make a comeback. Chapter 177. Set out. Eunuch Sun held the horsetail whisk in his hand and stood at the very front of the Imperial Guards. He straightened his back and shouted with a sharp voice. Every student was very happy. After all, there weren't many opportunities to leave the academy. Not to mention the full schedule of classes, it was very difficult to ask for leave from the teacher. Men and women traveling together like today was even more unthinkable. Therefore, no matter if it was a young lady from a famous family or a young master from an influential family, they were all looking forward to this trip to the Hidden Spirit Temple. Hellion Jiaoer and Liang family's young lady looked at each other and smiled. Supported by a maid, they entered the carriage. When Hellion Vivian turned around, she paused. It wasn't because of anything else, but because the carriage she was going to ride in had one of its wheels broken. If this kind of wheel went on a mountain road, it would certainly be unstable. In addition, at night, the mountain road was rugged and foggy. It was very easy for accidents to happen. According to reason, these carriages were all prepared by the retired emperor, so this kind of situation shouldn't happen. But unfortunately, the carriage she was going to ride in had a broken beam. As smart as Hellion Vivian was, she didn't believe that there would be such a coincidence. This situation seemed to be deliberately arranged by someone. After all, if a problem really happened, even if the Yamen investigated, it would at most be considered an accident. It seemed that the other party really wanted her to die immediately. Hellion Vivian stood up straight and narrowed her eyes. Just as she was about to send someone to ask if there were any other carriages, the little eunuch standing to the side threw the horsetail whisk in his hand and seemed to be anxious. Hurry up, hurry up. If we delay the retired emperor's time to burn incense, it will be a big crime. Hellion Vivian glanced at him, her eyes cold. The little eunuch unexpectedly felt that he was seen through. He was frightened and stepped back. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. If someone sits in this kind of carriage and something happens, who will bear the responsibility? Miss Hellion, you really are joking. With the Imperial Guards, how could something happen? The little eunuch's eyes turned around and he said with a laugh, Miss Hellion should quickly get on the carriage. Hellion Vivian hooked his thin lips. You want me to get in the car, but there is one thing, you go up with me. This? The little eunuch's face paled as he took a step back. Originally, he was the one who had tampered with the carriage. He had seen and done this kind of thing many times in the Imperial Palace. Those concubines and concubines, you set me up, I set you up, there were too many to count. When he first collected the money, he felt that this method was very vicious. When the carriage was on the mountain road, as long as it encountered the night fog, the wheels would slip and it would rush to the bottom of the cliff. He could get rid of the other party without anyone knowing. At that time, the carriage would be smashed to pieces. No matter how angry the retired emperor was, even if he sent many people to investigate, he would not be able to find any clues. That was why the little eunuch dared to accept that person's money. What's more, the eldest daughter of the Hellion family standing in front of him didn't have any power or influence. She was also driven out of her home by the Hellion family. Even if she wore the Hellion family's surname, when all was said and done, she was still nothing more than a commoner. In the Imperial Palace, almost every day, a palace maid would jump into the river. The death of a commoner wouldn't cause much of a commotion. Only, what the little eunuch didn't expect was that when it was time to leave, Hellion Vivian wanted him to get in the carriage with her. The little eunuch thought about the consequences and his expression became even more unsightly. This isn't too convenient. This servant has a filthy body. It wouldn't be good to disturb Miss Hellion's peace. Then change the carriage for me. Hellion Vivian looked at him with a smile that wasn't a smile. The little eunuch was so anxious that the sweat on his forehead was about to come out. His tone also became impatient. There are no other carriages. Miss Hellion isn't afraid that someone will come and blame retired emperor for his itinerary? Then let them come and blame me. The corners of Hellion Vivian's mouth carried a light smile as light as the wind and clouds. She swept a meaningful glance at the broken wheel of the carriage, just in time to let them investigate. How could a perfectly good carriage suddenly become like this? Hearing what was said, the little eunuch panicked. He originally wanted to use retired emperor to pressure this Hellion Vivian. Even if she wasn't willing to get in the carriage, she had no choice but to consider the overall situation. He didn't expect that it would unexpectedly become an excuse for her to threaten him. He thought that a 14-year-old little girl who hadn't entered the imperial palace wasn't worth guarding against. He could casually deal with her with 2 or 3 sentences. But now, he was caught between a rock and a hard place. If he left, this Hellion Vivian looked like she wouldn't leave if he didn't get in the carriage with her. Really, he'd seen so many young ladies from influential families, but he'd never seen one as unafraid of trouble as her. Don't look at him as a little eunuch. There were also many young ladies from influential families who curried favor with him. No matter how big their families were, they still had to give him face. But she, not to mention giving him face, she was just like a hooligan. She wasn't afraid of ruining her own reputation. If they didn't leave, Eunuch Sun would definitely send someone to question them. At that time, the matter of the wheels would most likely be found out. With Eunuch Sun's years of experience in the imperial palace, the matter of him receiving benefits would definitely be exposed. The problem was that even if he wanted to change the carriage for Hellion Vivian, it was too late. The imperial troops in front of them had already left. Next would be the students' carriages. If they didn't leave on time, the one who would be blamed in the end would still be him. Compared to the little eunuch's head full of cold sweat, Hellion Vivian looked abnormally refreshed. She lazily leaned back, her back leaning against a tree. Her 2 hands crossed in front of her chest as she watched this scene. The smile on her face was very obvious. Only then did the little eunuch react. What she said about pulling him into the carriage was just nonsense. She was waiting for the time to come so that the impatient eunuch's son would come and investigate her. No, not investigate her, but investigate him. The little eunuch's back shook, his eyes widened. An unprecedented cold feeling engulfed his entire body. This woman, she already knew that he was the one who tampered with the wheels. Eunuch Sunday, Hellion Vivian blew on her fingers and lightly smiled. The Hellion family gave a lot of money, right? The little eunuch's lips trembled, as if he was struck by something. His fingers also trembled. What is Miss Hellion talking about? This servant doesn't understand at all. Is that so? Hellion Vivian closed her eyes and rested. Then just wait for Eunuch Sun to come and ask. If he asks, you'll definitely understand. In a split second, the little eunuch's smile froze. He raised his head and looked at the smile on Hellion Vivian's face. It was as if he saw a demon that just walked out from hell. He no longer dared to treat her as a 14 or 15-year-old girl who didn't understand anything. He even somewhat regretted accepting this money. He absolutely couldn't wait until Eunuch Sun came to investigate. If Eunuch Sun came to investigate, that madam behind would inevitably be drawn out. Chapter 178. Miss Hellion, why don't you ride a horse? The little eunuch forced a smile. This servant has also prepared a horse here. Hellion Vivian smiled. You want me, an unmarried young lady, to ride a horse in public? This isn't too convenient. The little eunuch was speechless. She was using his words just now to block him. Furthermore, when had she ever cared about whether she was married or not? She clearly didn't want to leave. The little eunuch felt an unprecedented thorny problem. The little eunuch with the broken tail in front glanced at him, meaning for him to quickly follow. Unfortunately, Helly and Vivian didn't even move. The little eunuch thought that this time he was really finished. If this matter was leaked, there was no need for Eunuch's son to investigate. That madam would personally make a move. After all, only the dead could keep a secret. What to do? What should he do? Just as the little eunuch was at the end of his rope, a carriage suddenly stopped beside him. What's the matter? Did something happen to little sister Weiwei's carriage? It was like this in the upper-class circle. Obviously, two people had only met face-to-face a few times, but they could call each other sisters. Helly and Vivian raised her eyes and looked at the person who spoke. That was a young lady from an aristocratic family from the good compound. She looked like a pretty girl from a humble family. Her father had just been promoted to the capital, and now it could be considered smooth sailing. But seriously speaking, among this group of accompanying students, her status wasn't high. She also didn't have the slightest bit of martial chi talent, and also didn't participate in this time's test. Following to the hidden spirit temple like this was somewhat unexpected. Helly and Vivian's eyes flashed and she smiled faintly. There really is a problem. The carriage's wheels are somewhat old, and we're currently waiting for Eunuch's son to come and solve it. The wheels are old? That girl frowned and glanced at Helly and Vivian. She seemed to want to say something but hesitated. Then she continued, if little sister Weiwei doesn't mind, then sit in the same carriage with me. On this way up, us sisters can still talk to relieve our boredom. Helly and Vivian raised her eyebrows and was just about to refuse. The woman deliberately glanced at the wheel and said vaguely, coincidentally, I also have some things to remind my sister to be careful about. Oh, Helly and Vivian smirked. Then I'll have to trouble Sister Shun. What are you talking about? I'm just happy that you don't dislike me. As she spoke, Chun Wenwan glanced at the servant girl standing outside the carriage. Why aren't you helping little sister Weiwei up yet? The servant girl was about to step forward. Helly and Vivian took a big step forward. No need, I'll do it myself. Younger sister has such charming skills. Chun Wenwan laughed lightly, waving the paper fan in her hand. Every movement was like a painting. Helly and Vivian sat next to her and smiled. She didn't say anything else. Chun Wenwan looked outside the carriage, her gaze intentionally or unintentionally falling on that young eunuch. Only after glancing in that direction did she lower the curtain, her voice low. Let's go, don't miss the hour. Yes. With a light wave of the horsewhip, the wheels left a trail of tracks in the muddy rain-soaked ground. The young eunuch stood in the shadows, unable to see his expression. He could only faintly feel that he let out a sigh of relief. With the Imperial Guard leading the way, the carriages behind were much steadier than usual. In addition, these carriages were all personally prepared by the retired emperor. Sitting in them was very comfortable. There was even a small square table in the carriage. On the square table, there was a small teapot and a pile of dried fruits. The more she looked, the more it seemed like an outdoor outing. Helly and Vivian poured herself a cup of tea. The best thing about taking a mountain road was that it wasn't too hot. With the gentle breeze, one could see beauty everywhere. Helly and Vivian had just taken a sip of tea when Chun Wenwan, who was sitting next to her, looked left and right. She took a deep breath, as if she was making an important decision. She leaned over and whispered in her ear. That carriage of yours was set up by little sister Jiao Er and the others. Helly and Vivian's fingers that were playing with the porcelain cup paused. Her eyebrows jumped. How did sister know? I came early today and saw it with my own eyes. Chun Wenwan finished speaking and let out a long sigh. It looks like little sister Jiao Er won't tolerate you. Helly and Vivian smiled. Since it's like this, why didn't sister tell Eunuch's son but instead told me? Little sister, do you really not understand or are you pretending not to understand? Chun Wenwan picked up a piece of pastry. Little sister Jiao Er is someone who cannot be provoked at White Academy. She also has the protection of the 4 great clans. No matter what the royal family's attitude is, the retired emperor also hopes that the one to become the 3rd princess consort will be little sister Jiao Er. Eunuch's son is someone who follows the royal family. How could he cause trouble for his future master? Even if I said it, what benefit would I get? When the time comes, maybe I'll even be pushed out of the academy. Helly and Vivian smiled again. Listening to sister's meaning, It seems like you've suffered a loss in this aspect. Little sister really is smart. Chen Wenwan smiled again with a deeper meaning. At this point, even if there is no enmity or resentment, as long as one's appearance is not bad, and has the opportunity to get close to His Highness, they will all be pushed aside. It's just that we're all small fries. Actually, little sister, being targeted like this, haven't you thought of any countermeasures? What countermeasures? Hellion Vivian followed along with the other's words, smiling yet not smiling. Chen Wenwan looked around and made sure that the car windows were all closed. Only then did she mysteriously whisper, I actually have a method here. What method? Hellion Vivian cooperated and also lowered her body. Chen Wenwan hesitated for a moment, pausing between each word. This time, going to the hidden spirit temple to offer incense is actually because of the flood in the south. The retired emperor wants to go pray for blessings. If there is someone who does something wrong, they will certainly receive a heavier punishment than usual. Little sister, it would be better for you to take advantage of this opportunity and fight for yourself. Fight for myself. Hellion Vivian didn't seem to understand. The light in Chen Wenwan's eyes faintly deepened. Every year, after offering incense at the hidden spirit temple, retired emperor would order the students to accompany him on a stroll around the ancient pavilion. When the time comes, younger sister can only place this thing on the person you want to deal with. When the time comes, older sister, I will not easily bump into her, and our matter will be settled. What is this? Hellion Vivian took the yellow package that Chen Wenwan handed over, her eyes narrowing. Chen Wenwan's voice was low. Shaman wood. Also an item of great evil. Crack. Another wooden stick broke under the wheels of the carriage. Hellion Vivian's body swayed along with it, her fingers pausing. Why is big sister helping me like this? If it weren't for the fact that I was pushed aside too much, I wouldn't have this kind of thought. Chen Wenwan lowered her head, letting out a long sigh. Sometimes people just can't help themselves. Who told us to come from poor backgrounds? As long as we stand out a bit, we will be targeted. I just don't want to live this kind of life anymore. Chapter 179. Hellion Vivian lowered her eyes. Then when should I put this witchwood in? Little sister doesn't need to worry about this. Chen Wenwan's eyes quickly flashed with a trace of light. When we arrive at the hidden spirit temple, there will be people who will arrange for the students to rest. The young ladies will always have a convenient time. Before the night tour, little sister only needs to take advantage of the time when the retired emperor is burning incense and place this thing on that person's body. Hellion Vivian slightly wrinkled her brows. What if it's discovered? Little sister, you don't need to worry. With me as a cover, no one will see. Chen Wenwan said with a sense of loyalty, her tone even carrying a hint of incitement. Hellion Vivian thoughtfully smiled. Okay, then let's try according to elder sister's method. Since someone had dug a hole for her to jump into, if she didn't go and explore, wouldn't that be too much of a pity? However, when the time came, the one caught in the middle would probably be someone else. The carriage traveled for about 8 hours before it was time to rest. Everyone sat in their own seats. The young masters of the aristocratic families sat across from each other, drinking water and chatting. Their elegant demeanor made the young ladies in dresses laugh one after another. In contrast to the men's side that was joyous and harmonious, the women's side was clearly divided into factions. No one was willing to sit together with Hellion Vivian. Even though she had won first place in the armament competition in front of everyone, in the hearts of the girls, she who had no power, no influence, and even no looks, simply wouldn't accompany them to drink tea together. The servant girl served them meticulously, taking out the prepared osmanthus and lotus seed soup and pouring it bit by bit into the bowls. This was iced in advance and was most suitable for drinking when going out. Hellion Jiaoer took the bowls and instructed the servant girl, let the other 2 older sisters have a taste too. Although it's not anything good, it'll quench their thirst. This icy cold feeling really isn't bad. The young miss of the Liang family carefully drank a mouthful, using a handkerchief to cover the corners of her mouth. After seeing Hellion Vivian sitting across from her and eating steamed buns, she disdainfully curled her lips. Some people really are lacking in status. What kind of place is this, eating steamed buns and spiced beef? But what's up with that Chin guy? Why is he hanging out with that country bumpkin? Hellion Jiaoer also glanced at Hellion Vivian and smiled. The young masters on the other side also noticed the commotion. While drinking the Longjing tea served by the waiter, he glanced in the direction of Hellion Vivian from time to time. The disdain on his face was very obvious. If not, this ugly person can't enter the Hall of Elegance. No matter how powerful she is, she's still a barbaric woman. A few of them laughed and some even joked, with her looks, even if you send her to me, I'll have to think about it. Ha ha. The young master spoke in a very low voice, and the bystanders could not hear them at all. If Hellion Vivian really heard this, the person who said this probably wouldn't live to see the next weekend. Moreover, they had never thought that one day, the person whom they disdained to even touch, would actually have such a stunning appearance to contend for the throne of the capital. However, this was all a story for later. As of now, Hellion Vivian still had that slightly dark face, and she was absent-mindedly nibbling on the steamed bun in her hand. Actually, her table manners were very good, with a kind of British elegance. With a smile that wasn't a smile, she would use wooden chopsticks to pick up a piece of beef and place it in her mouth. Her lunchbox was also very good-looking. It was made of pure wood, and its insulation was very good. On one side there were fruits and vegetables. It looked very appetizing. She didn't know if it was because it was too appetizing. Unexpectedly, a voice came from the side of her ear. Hey woman, what are you eating? I want to exchange with you. Sitting beside Hellion Vivian, Chan Wenwan's hand that was drinking tea paused. As the shadow of the tree swayed, she finally clearly saw the appearance of the man who spoke. Her beautiful eyes widened, and her pink lips were tightly pursed. She didn't know when, but the hand that was holding the handkerchief had been tightly clenched. Her fingernails penetrated the handkerchief and left red marks on her palm. Her heart was beating wildly. Miss? Her personal maid tugged at her sleeve, as if reminding her to pay attention to the situation. Only then did Chan Wenwan wake up with a start. Taking a deep breath, she nonchalantly used her sleeve to cover her palm. When she raised her eyes again, they were already incomparably gentle. Young Master Heize grunted, carrying an unconcealable tyrannical aura. He strode past her and lowered his eyes to look at Hellion Vivian. Woman, you didn't hear what I said, did you? What are you going to exchange with me? Hellion Vivian unhurriedly put down the wooden chopsticks in her hand. She didn't have any intention of responding to young Master He. Last time he even used her to test his childhood sweetheart and whatnot. It was simply enough. Heize greedily glanced at the marinated beef in her lunchbox. That little servant of mine made bird's nest for me. Right now it's still chilled. I'll give it all to you. Bird's nest. Hellion Vivian uninterestedly shrugged her shoulders. Swallow saliva, you can keep it for yourself and slowly eat it. Heize glared. Originally, he spoke up to help Hellion Vivian get out of this predicament. Why did this silly woman always bring something that couldn't be brought out in public when she went out? But after seeing her lunchbox, he started drooling. After entering the temple, there wouldn't be any meat to eat. Right now, he just wanted to eat a mouthful of marinated beef to satisfy his craving. Then what will it take for you to give me your lunchbox? I've already eaten half of it. You still want it? Hellion Vivian swept a glance over Heize's eyes. She knew that the other party had taken a fancy to the meat in her lunchbox. Knowing that this partner of hers was a master that couldn't be happier without meat, she followed suit and laughed. If you really want me to give it to you, then I can. 1,000 taels of silver. Heize didn't say anything, but the little servant beside him jumped up. 1,000 taels of silver, you might as well go rob someone. Really, in the time that he wasn't with the young master, just what kind of people did the young master befriend? Why did he look at this Hellion Vivian in a new light? You think it's expensive? Hellion Vivian was only joking. After seeing the disdain in the little servant's eyes, her smile became even wider, but the depths of her eyes were ice cold. Young Master He doesn't have to buy it. As soon as Heize saw her like this, he knew that she was angry. Originally, the two of them often joked, especially this kind of joke about money. How come when someone else got involved, the flavor changed? This young master still hasn't spoken. Why are you interrupting? Heize indifferently said. Go prepare 1,000 taels of silver for Miss Hellion. He did this not only to tell the little servant that Hellion Vivian was different, but also to let those young masters know that some jokes shouldn't be made carelessly. After all, Heise's identity was there. Seeing that he also ate the marinated beef, the other people also couldn't say anything. They could only embarrassedly move their gazes away and stop talking. Hellion Vivian naturally understood Heise's intentions. She lightly laughed and said, "No need, how could I use 1,000 taels of silver? If you like it, then take it to eat. I also brought wine here, how about it?" Chapter 180. There's even wine. Heise's eyes thoroughly lit up this time. "Quickly take it out and drink a few mouthfuls." Hellion Vivian made a sound of agreement and spread out the things she brought. Apart from the sauced beef, there were also small ribs neatly arranged. It looked like there were meat and vegetables and it was still steaming. She then poured 2 cups of wine and really enjoyed it very much. The young masters naturally also smelled that fragrance, but since they previously mocked Hellion Vivian, it wasn't good for them to come here and ask for wine and meat. They could only swallow their saliva and smile, but in their hearts, they were very envious of Heise. Under this kind of environment, he could still eat a mouthful of food. One must know that after entering the temple, it was a vegetarian feast. Not to mention that not a drop of wine was touched. They also weren't allowed to eat meat. The young masters tasted tea and snacks and quietly gossiped. Unconsciously, their voices became louder and louder. On the other side of them was Bailey Jia's carriage. Eunuch Sun was worried that these discussions would disturb His Highness' rest, so he took a horsetail whisk and smiled towards this side. "Young masters, His Highness still has to lead the team in the afternoon and needs to rest. Everyone please be quiet." Yes, Eunuch Sun's reminder is correct. We saw that Heise, that guy, had a good relationship with that Hellion family's eldest young lady at some unknown time. We felt astonished in our hearts and couldn't help but say a few more words. "Is that so? What kind of good relationship?" An indifferent and deep voice came from the direction of the carriage. A few young masters raised their heads to look and saw Beligaju leaning against the window with his chin propped up. His face wore a silver mask, and the corners of his lips lightly sunk. Under the alternating shadows of the sunlight and branches, it formed a quiet beauty, but there wasn't a trace of a smile in the depths of his eyes. "Royal, I'm really sorry to wake you up, it's fine. His Highness just happened to feel bored and wanted to hear what you were talking about." Beligaju unhurriedly put down the teacup in his hand. His voice was indifferent, but it carried a kind of indescribable oppressive feeling. "No, I just feel that it's really rare for Hei's to be like this today. That Hellion Vivian brought a lot of things and is sitting over there with Hei's to eat." In front of Bailey Jiaju, the few young masters naturally wouldn't be as unbridled as before. They were afraid that Third Prince would mistakenly believe that they were debauches who specialized in gossiping about other people behind their backs. They hurriedly pointed in a direction not too far away. "Your Highness can see for yourself. Those two people seem to have a very good relationship." Bailey Jiaju followed that person's finger and looked over. It just so happened to be the scene of Hellion Weiwei pouring wine for Heise with the side of her face. Heise conveniently pinched a piece of pork rib from her lunchbox and put it into his mouth. Bailey Jiaju's dark pupils dilated in that split second, but he quickly calmed down. That handsome face was still as indifferent as before, with an indifferent appearance. It seemed that he was not very interested in what he was paying attention to. In contrast, those young masters always felt that they were too gossipy, and laughed awkwardly. Heise has always been unpredictable. It's probably because old Master Hei's side urged him too much, and he's also had some thoughts. Speaking of which, he used to be pretty good to that childhood sister of his, but recently he's been rejecting that girl, but he's become closer to Hellion Weiwei. Could it be that he's serious this time? After saying that, they felt that saying this seemed to be even more gossipy. They might as well forcibly change the topic to Beligaju. "Your Highness, when will you get married?" 3 days later. Beligaju's tone was indifferent as he gave the other party a few words. Not to mention those young masters who were dumbfounded. Even Eunuch Sun looked like he was struck by lightning. 3 days later? Eunuch Sun stammered, somewhat forcing a smile. "Your Highness is joking again. You still haven't decided on a princess consort candidate. How can you get married? Also, the matter of you getting married, How come this old servant didn't know at all? The retired emperor also didn't get the news, okay? Getting married, this kind of thing, shouldn't it be done by two people? Who is the other person? Your Highness, making this kind of joke that can be exposed as soon as you say it is really not suitable for you. Beligaju slowly glanced at Eunuch Sunday. Eunuch Sun's scalp trembled. Several young masters looked at each other. We won't disturb your Highness any longer. There is still an hour of rest. Your Highness should get a clean sleep. After saying that, those people mounted their respective war horses. Bailey Jia still maintained that posture, slowly closing his eyes. Eunuch Sun stood outside the carriage and watched as the smile on the corner of his mouth disappeared. A burst of coldness welled up between his eyebrows. After about half a stick of incense's time, the retired emperor ordered the rest to end and everyone was ready to go. Heizei heard the order and walked in front of his warhorse. Before he could mount his horse, he was blocked by a slender figure. That man didn't seem to be deliberately waiting for him. He had an indifferent appearance, a silver robe with black hair, like an immortal under the moon. His face was covered with a silver mask, only revealing a pair of bewitchingly cold and indifferent eyes. Your Highness. Heizei's expression didn't change as he saluted. Beligaju looked at him with a smile that wasn't a smile. His whole body emitted an indescribable aura of abstinence, but it also made people shudder. Stay away from her. The man slightly raised his eyes and looked at Heizei's astonished gaze. The side of his face was as cold as a perfectly carved ice sculpture. Even if you don't want your reputation, she, a young lady of an aristocratic family, also wants her face. Heizei smiled evilly and was just about to say, what if this young master didn't do as he was told? Then he heard Beligaju's cold voice from the side of his ear. That childhood sweetheart of yours seems to have also reached the age of marriage. Tell me, shouldn't this prince have imperial grandfather bestow a marriage for her? Heizei suddenly raised his head and narrowed his eyes. He always knew that the third prince wasn't easy to deal with, but he didn't expect that he would be hard to deal with to this extent. How did that woman provoke this kind of man? Specifically picking a person's weak spot to strike. Heizei smiled. Your Highness is right. Being too close to her will indeed affect her reputation. It's my thinking that was too simple. Even if I want to be close, I still have to wait for grandfather's approval. Heizei deliberately added the last sentence. He didn't believe that the third prince would inexplicably warn him for a woman. Beligaju curved his thin lips and took a step forward. His deep eyes were like ice fog rising in the night sky. As he brushed past him, he only left behind an ice-cold warning. You can see if Lord Hayes nod first, or if that childhood sweetheart of yours will be betrothed first. In an instant, Heizei's left hand clenched tightly. The smile on his face faded in the next second. After a moment, he smiled again and pressed his fingers against his forehead. He thought that the matter of that woman provoking the third prince was already over. He didn't expect that it still wasn't over. But for him to believe that the third prince liked that woman, that wasn't very likely. Could it be that the rumors were true? That the third prince was choosing a consort now to use someone as a shield, in order to protect the woman he truly cared about. Chapter 181. Even so, he shouldn't use that woman like that. The eyes frowned. He didn't say anything, but in his heart, he had long regarded Hellion Vivian as his own younger sister, the kind of younger sister with brotherly affection. He had never seen such a woman. Too many things had happened to her. Even if it was a man, it was very likely that he would be unable to recover from this setback. But she was so free and easy, as if she could face anything she encountered. Her personality was good, and she was very gentle, especially when treating the elderly. He knew that she obviously didn't have a gentle personality, but she would always take care of people. She had a sense of balance when interacting with people, making people feel very comfortable. It was no wonder that the people in the shop worshipped her like an idol, regardless of gender. However, it was because of this person that her family and power were taken away, and she was driven out by the Hellion family. Without the support of the power behind her, it was more convenient to use her. He didn't deny that when he first came into contact with Hellion Vivian, he also wanted to use her to achieve the effect of protecting the person at the top of his heart. After all, the situation in the capital was very unstable. There were some secrets that the people of the four great families didn't want to let the imperial court, and even the successors like them know. These secrets made He uneasy, which was why he changed his attitude in recent years. But ever since he truly met Hellion Vivian, he didn't have the thought of sacrificing another person to protect one person. After all, he wasn't a member of the imperial family, so he didn't have to go to that extent. It was just that the person he liked had no interest in him at all. She also didn't care who he would marry in the future. That was why he repeatedly tried to get close to Hellion Vivian, wanting that person to regret it in the future. But when he did these actions, he was sure that even if someone really came to cause trouble for Wei Wei, he would be able to deal with it, because he cherished this friend. As for what the third prince was thinking, he had no way of knowing. If the other party really chose Hellion Vivian to be his consort in order to protect the servant girl who was once very important to him, then no matter what happened in the future, Hellion Vivian would have to shoulder it by herself. The competition in the imperial palace was even more fierce than in the family. In addition, the current empress was not the third prince's biological mother, and the emperor was always obsessed with women. Once Hellion Vivian entered the palace, she would be like a piece of fish waiting to be cut up. The third prince chose this third princess consort so that she could replace the woman at the bottom of his heart to block these knives. How could Hellion Vivian have it easy after all? The third prince's thoughts were too deep. It was hard to say why he was doing this. In addition, the news he received when he returned to the capital recently was also related to that maid. Soon this news would spread to the capital. At that time, what would the third prince do? It seemed that when he arrived at the hidden spirit temple, he had to find an opportunity to have a good talk with that woman and have her stay a bit further away from the third prince. It would be best if she didn't involve herself in this relationship of endless benefits. Zhe didn't know that Hellion Vivian was already involved, and that everything she did was voluntary. Because of Hellion Vivian's identity, she was destined to be involved in this relationship of benefits. She definitely wouldn't stay out of harm's way. If she wanted to take back the Hellion family, she first had to stand on equal footing with the four great clans. Because what she had to face was not only those traitors of the Hellion family, but also the Su family, who had extraordinary influence in the court creek. At dusk, the wheels rolled through the last section of the journey to the hidden spirit temple. This section of the mountain road was very rugged. In addition, there were many trees on the mountain, so it wasn't very convenient to walk. Hellion Vivian didn't open her eyes, but saw that Chen Wenwan, who was sitting across from her, had already woken up. Sitting across from her, Chen Wenwan looked at her with her eyes wide open. Seeing that she was awake, a smile appeared on her face. "Younger sister, you finally left. The road ahead seems to be blocked. The guards are at the fork in the road." In this kind of weather, it's indeed easy for something to happen. Hellion Vivian curved her thin lips into a smile that wasn't a smile. In all likelihood, this road blockage was also man-made. Chen Wenwan used a handkerchief to wipe the water stains by the window. "Younger sister is right. We have to be a bit more careful. If the road ahead is really blocked, I reckon that in a moment we'll have to walk all the way over." Hellion Vivian indifferently responded. As if it wasn't easy, Chen Wenwan asked one more sentence. "Younger sister seems to be very close with young Master He." "It's all right." Hellion Vivian smiled. Chen Wenwan lowered her eyes and wiped the window again. "Younger sister is truly blessed. Don't talk about me. Elder sister Chen really guessed correctly. We have to walk the next section of the road up the mountain." As Hellion Vivian spoke, she lifted the curtain of the carriage and strolled out. It was still raining outside. In front, the young ladies of the great clans had already received the news from the guards on horseback. One by one, they walked down from the carriage, their maidservants holding umbrellas as they stood to the side and waited. Hellion Vivian and the others were more or less at the end of the group. After waiting for them to come down, they began to move forward again. However, this time they switched to walking. From afar, Hellion Vivian could see a tall and straight figure standing in the middle of a group of people, untainted by the wind and dust. Hellion Vivian was puzzled. It was raining so heavily, yet not a single drop of water had splashed onto his body. As she thought of this, Hellion Vivian looked towards Zhe, whose black hair was already wet. She saw that raindrops were dripping down from his forehead, and this was a normal situation. That person from the royal family was too abnormal. As if he had noticed her gaze, that person actually turned his face to look in her direction. She didn't know if it was because he was holding an umbrella or because it was raining, but that pair of eyes that were as deep as a pool of bones were deeper and colder than ever. It was as if not a trace of warmth could be melted into them. Just by looking at her like that, he was so cold that it made her teeth ache. Hellion Vivian was stunned. What was going on? She didn't provoke him, right? However, even if he was as unreachable as a god, there were still people who would worry about his safety. Eunuch Sun was the best example. Your Highness, the road ahead is too slippery. Please watch your step. Hellion Vivian looked at the continuously shouting eunuch and shook her head. She thought that with the royal family's degree of misophobia, even if you didn't remind him, he would still be very careful. Is there money on the ground? You didn't even raise your head when looking at it. When the cold voice sounded in her ears, Hellion Vivian always had the illusion that she was in the North Pole. Your Highness. Why did this man run to the back of the group? Hellion Vivian furrowed her willowy eyebrows. Beligaju looked at her coldly. The corners of his mouth pulled up in an arc that couldn't be considered a smile. Who else did you think it was? Hellion Vivian. She didn't think it was anyone. Do you often forget to bring your brain when you go out? Beligaju glanced at her empty hand, his eyes indifferent. Hellion Vivian. After not seeing him for a few days, this man's poisonous tongue was becoming more and more undisguised. Wait a minute. He came here specifically to mock her intelligence. Chapter 182. Just as Hellion Vivian was thinking, an incomparably soft fox fur cloak covered her from the top of her head, carrying a special scent of mint and sandalwood. Wearing it was very warm and comfortable. Hellion Vivian wrinkled her shapely eyebrows. This kind of action could easily attract other people's sidelong glances. At this time, letting those noble young ladies set their eyes on her wasn't a good thing. She didn't believe that third prince didn't understand this logic. Hellion Vivian opened her mouth and was just about to refuse. She heard Beligaju's indifferent voice announce, "Continue to walk forward. Those without umbrellas go to Eunuch Sun's place to get a windbreaker. Don't delay the time." The hidden meaning of these words was clearly blaming Hellion Vivian for slowing down their journey. Just a moment ago, Hellion Jiao Air's eyes still exuded poison flashed with a complacent smiling expression. With the maid holding the umbrella, she slowly curved her thin lips. Very good, they still haven't arrived at the hidden spirit temple. Yet third prince already started to become impatient with that slut. Wait until they arrive at the hidden spirit temple. Once the plan is carried out, His Highness will even more regard her as a poisonous woman. The other people also had expressions of schadenfreude. You talk, I laugh, and continue to walk forward. No one actually went to get a windbreaker. Basically, everyone understood third prince's meaning. Even if His Highness spoke indifferently and politely, it was still difficult to conceal the disdain he had for Hellion Vivian. Only Eunuch Sun didn't think this way. He just stood to one side and swallowed his saliva with all his might. That fox fur cloak wasn't Master's favorite clothing. Last year, young Master Lai left a handprint on it and was almost beaten into a pig's head by Master. But now, His Highness unexpectedly gave this cloak to a woman. Eunuch Sun almost suspected that his own presbyopia had worsened. Or was it that retired emperor recently gave him too much pressure, and he dreamt that His Highness finally opened his eyes? My ass. Even if he opened his eyes, it still couldn't be this Miss Hellion. That would mean that he had to change from one nightmare to another. Moreover, when did His Highness let him prepare a cloak for everyone? He didn't have anything here. Eunuch Sun roared in his heart, but there was a smile on his face. However, when he came back to his senses, he found that his master had already walked far away. He hurriedly took the umbrella and followed. Hellion Vivian didn't care what Beligaju thought, but she wasn't stupid. The current situation was much better than before, and she could enjoy the warmth of the cloak with peace of mind. I wonder how much the third prince's cape would fetch if I were to sell it. Last time, his handkerchief was sold for 10,000 taels of silver. This cloak was worth at least 10 times more. Return it to me after you're done. As if he saw through what she was thinking, the man's incomparably bewitching voice once again sounded from beside her ear. If I find out again that something that should be here with you has appeared in the market, whoever buys it from you, I will make that person close the door. He spoke the last few words very slowly, so slow that Helene Vivian felt her scalp go numb. Only then did that slightly cold and indifferent voice go far away. His whole body was solitary and handsome. No matter when he looked at it, he was perfect to the point that he didn't have any flaws. Helene Vivian secretly dispelled the idea of selling the item. If the third prince threatened that if she sold this cloak, he would make her look good, Helene Vivian would completely ignore these words. If he threatened, then he threatened. She, the Queen of Arms, wasn't someone to be trifled with. But the man said that whoever bought her cloak would have that person close the door. This kind of two-faced method, how did he think of it? Helene Vivian felt that she couldn't compare to the third prince in terms of shamelessness. Since she couldn't sell it, then she'd take it for herself. In any case, this cloak felt pretty good. Your Highness. Shadow quietly appeared behind Beligaju. He knelt down on one knee on the rainy ground. His whole body was dressed in black. Your Highness guessed correctly. There's a problem with this broken piece of wood. Beligaju's eyes flashed. Standing with his back against the light and under the setting sun, he was like a character who walked out of a manga. At this moment, his body was no longer indifferent and elegant. Instead, it was filled with a thick and heavy murderous aura. Protect the retired emperor well. Today, no one is allowed to enter the temple. Otherwise, kill without mercy. Yes. Shadow lowered his eyes and his figure once again disappeared. Originally, if they took a carriage, they would only need the time it takes to burn a stick of incense to reach the temple. But without the carriage, coupled with the fact that it had rained and the mountain was slippery, no matter how organized they were, by the time they reached the top of the mountain, the sky was already hazy and dark. Fortunately, the rain finally stopped. The imperial bodyguard who was leading the way ran over, and was just about to knock on the door. Just as he was about to knock on the door, he heard a thick and old voice from inside, Umitba. Lay down the butcher's knife and become a Buddha on the spot. I didn't know that there was a distinguished guest coming. Sorry for not coming out to meet you. That voice was deep and distant with an indescribable tranquility, making it easy for people who heard it to lay down their hearts and return to nature. The imperial bodyguard looked left and right. He could only hear the voice but could not see the person. Unable to open the door, he was so anxious that his forehead was covered in sweat. Beligaju casually walked over. His eyes fell on the imperial bodyguard's waist. His voice was indifferent. Take away the knife. The royal is still the most intelligent and thoughtful. As soon as he finished speaking, the wooden door slowly opened. An old man in his 60s stood there with white hands. He had a white beard and white eyebrows, wearing a Buddhist robe. He was the temple's abbot. He fiddled with his Buddhist beads and laughed. This old monk knew that the retired emperor was coming and had already prepared a vegetarian meal behind the temple. How about letting this disciple of mine lead the retired emperor over first? This old monk and the royal family haven't seen each other for many days. I still want to ask the royal family for advice on some Buddhist teachings. Basically, almost the entire Dragon War Empire knew about the grudge between the royal family and the Shaolin Temple. The situation was like this. That year, this temple's abbot was still a hedonistic young master who had not converted to Buddhism. He infiltrated the beggar sects, 3 major sects, and became the leader of the entire capital. Beating anyone up was a matter of minutes, yet he fell into the hands of a little boy. Speaking of this matter, the temple's abbot was also unlucky. At that time, he mistook the third prince for some family's young master and kidnapped him to the mountain. Then they were beaten up. How could there be such a child in this world? No matter how powerful he was, he should have counterattacked on the spot. That way, they would not have been wiped out in one fell swoop. Even now, whenever Abbot Fengzhang thought of a certain person's words at that time, he would gnash his teeth in anger. What did he mean by being kidnapped is also quite interesting. Did they look like toys? Did they? Since that day, they were swept clean by the soldiers. At that time, Abbot Fengzhang found out that the little boy was none other than the world-famous third prince. Regarding this, Abbot Fengzhang suffered a blow. Every time he did something, his purpose was to defeat this genius highness, including his conversion to Buddhism, because all the martial arts in the world were from the Shaolin Temple. This rumor was already not a secret in the capital. Therefore, as soon as Abbot Fengzhang's words fell, everyone's line of sight turned towards Beligaju. He merely brushed away the non-existent dust on his fingertips and absent-mindedly said, "Want to find me to compete? Ask for advice on Buddhist teachings." Abbot Fengzhang's expression didn't change as he corrected his words. Bailey Jiaju grunted and faintly smiled like a demon. "Then forget it, I don't understand Buddhist teachings." Abbot Fengzhang quickly opened his mouth. "It's a competition. A competition." "Oh." Bailey Jiaju lazily yawned. "It's cold on the mountain, I don't feel like moving." Abbot Fengzhang. "Then you still want to compete with me, are you playing with me?" Chapter 183. Abbot, don't be impulsive. Seeing that the situation wasn't right, the little monk immediately reached out and hugged the abbot's trousers. "Let go of me." Abbot Fengzhang rudely pulled his sleeve back. The arrogance on his face no longer had the slightest bit of immortal charm. "If I don't beat this stinking brat till he pisses his pants in terror, then I'm not surnamed Feng." Beligaju chuckled, the side of his face indifferent. "Your surname isn't Feng to begin with." Boom! Abbot Fengzhang's temples throbbed. His entire person exploded. Eunuch Sun desperately blocked in front, holding a horsetail whisk to persuade. "Great master, calm down, calm down." After saying this, he was about to cry, saying in his heart, "Your Highness, don't provoke the great master anymore. Can't you see that he's about to vomit blood because of you?" The young ladies and young masters behind were all dumbstruck. Was this really Hidden Spirit Temple's most respected great master? He really didn't look like one. Hellion Vivian actually didn't feel that this was unexpected. Her master and Elder Huan were also like this. Normally, they looked like they were floating in the air. But once they heard the 3 words Third Prince, they absolutely loved and hated, gnashing their teeth in anger. It could be seen how much hatred a certain highness could attract. In this Dragon War Empire, there probably wouldn't be a second prince as black-bellied as him. Abbot Fengzhang, the vegetarian meal at retired emperor's side is still waiting. After the vegetarian meal, it won't be too late for you to discuss with the royal family. In short, let's leave first, dear ones. If this continues, our temple's image will be gone. Head Abbot Fengzhang took a deep breath and brushed his own monastic robe. By the time everyone came back to their senses, he'd already recovered that steady, fairy-like demeanor. The speed at which he changed his expression was so fast that it made Wei Wei especially sigh. If this was in the modern era, he'd also be at the level of a movie emperor. Beligaju still didn't change the indifference on his face, as if he didn't take the old man's words to heart at all. Abbot Fengzhang clenched his hands again, thinking that there was still a night to fight, so he slowed down his tone. "Everyone, please follow this old monk. The female benefactors' banquets are set in the west wing. The male benefactors' banquets are set in the east wing." Hearing this, a young master curled his lips in boredom. "I thought it was a man and a woman together. How boring." "Don't worry, we'll still be able to tour the pavilion together at night. There will be plenty of chances." The several young masters smiled at each other, looking towards the side of the outstanding girl. Waving the paper fans in their hands, they followed head Abbot Fengzhang into the east wing room. The young ladies of the aristocratic families had long expected this situation. Although they had all reached the age of marriage, each of them had a target in their hearts, and even today their hearts were beating a little faster. But in ancient times, the most important thing was reputation. The abbot's arrangement was exactly what they wanted. Just like what their mother had taught them, the more they couldn't touch those men, the more they would miss them. "Ladies almsgivers, this is the place." The little monk who led the way put his palms together and made a remonstrating gesture. The young lady surnamed Liang sized up the room and frowned slightly. "Why is the place so small?" The young monk paused in his footsteps and said with a faint smile, "The temple is simple and crude. Please forgive me, benefactress." The young lady of the Liang family still wanted to say something. A slightly deep voice came from the other end. It seems that Minister Liang's beloved daughter is not satisfied with the temple's arrangement. It turned out to be the retired emperor, who had already finished his vegetarian meal. Behind him were several assisting ministers and womenfolk. The overly familiar figure made Helene Vivian clench her fists one by one. That figure was standing among the accompanying womenfolk. She was wearing a pure white long dress embroidered with lotus flowers, a jade pendant of safety hanging in front of her chest. Her long hair was tied up into a flower. One hand was twirling sparkling and translucent Buddhist beads. The other hand was on a maid's arm. She slowly walked over. Her appearance was well maintained. She was clearly already in her 30s, but she looked like she was only in her early 20s. That year, she had relied on this kind of otherworldly and delicate appearance to capture the heart of that scumbag of a father. Su Yenemo. The name she would never forget in this lifetime. At that time, her mother was already at the end of her life. Her chest was gasping for air, and her body was deteriorating day by day. However, she was still dignified in front of others. Even if she was terminally ill, she never lost face in front of Su Yenemo. It was only when she felt that she couldn't take it anymore that she made a request to Helian Guangyao, asking him to be lenient to her daughter on account of their relationship as husband and wife for more than 10 years. Her mother had never begged anyone in her life. However, at the last moment she begged someone for her. Helene Vivian had already forgotten what the scene was at that time. Her memory seemed to have been stimulated by something and became a little fuzzy. She only remembered that woman bringing her maid to the side room and mocking her mother word by word. "Sister, don't be silly. What do you think you can do by holding on like this? So what if you're more powerful and talented than me? Your husband still chose me in the end. That's why I say everyone has their own fate. Don't fight with the heavens. In the end, the one to suffer is also you." Helene Vivian closed her eyes tightly. When she opened them again, her pupils had already become clear. It was ridiculous when she thought about it. When the Su family spread rumors about her mother being rude, why didn't they think about what their own family had done? She had a child with a married man before she was even married. Her family was broken and her family was dead. Such a big hatred. Until now, she had finally seen the culprit of all this. Helene Vivian slowly let go of her hand and restrained her anger. She returned to her calm and indifferent appearance. However, when the official with the surname Liang heard the words of the retired emperor, his expression changed instantly. He knelt on the ground and anxiously explained, "My daughter is young and did not mean it. Please forgive her, retired emperor." Sigh. The retired emperor smiled and waved his hand. He looked very amiable and did not show any anger. However, when he said the next sentence, the young lady of the Liang family also changed her expression. "If you are not satisfied, you can go down the mountain. There is no such thing as a crime. Minister Liang, you are too serious." Minister Liang wiped the sweat on his forehead and did not dare to get up. "Yes, what you said is right. It is better to be quiet in the temple." After the retired emperor said this, he continued to lead the officials forward. He had no intention of letting the official with the surname Liang get up. The young lady of the Liang family was stunned. She really did not expect that because of her words, she would fall into this situation. Was this the legendary emperor's prestige? She did not understand, but it did not mean that the accompanying officials did not understand. During this period of time, the Liang family was too favored. They were too favored and became arrogant. The retired emperor was not like the emperor. He was very clear-minded. This time, in addition to praying for blessings, he also wanted to take the opportunity to see the character of these young ladies. Since the first one to stand out was the young lady of the Liang family, he had to suppress her. It would also prevent others from having thoughts that they should not have. Chapter 184. Using both kindness and severity was the method of a ruler since ancient times. Helene Vivian saw this scene but didn't say anything. She only curved her lips. This trip to the hidden spirit temple wouldn't be as peaceful as the retired emperor had hoped. Eldest Mississippi, Helene Vivian was just about to enter the side room to eat when she was stopped in her tracks by an outstanding-looking servant girl. That servant girl was none other than Su Yenmo's personal servant girl, Xiaolian, who served her all year round. She slowly walked towards Helene Vivian. She was wearing a light pink long dress with satin on the outside. Although it couldn't be considered very beautiful, It revealed the amorous feelings that had been cultivated over many years. She was only a servant girl, but she ate and used better than her. A true member of the Hellion bloodline. Eldest miss, Madam knew that you were driven out of the family and was upset. She didn't have much money on her, so she ordered this servant to bring you some jewelry. Madam said that you're about to get married and need these things. She was worthy of being Madame Sue's head servant girl. Her eyes were obviously hiding disdain, but every word was appropriate. Hellion Vivian didn't immediately take the jewelry bag in her hand. She only curved her lips into a smile and seemed to be indifferent. How many years have you been in the Defense Division's residence? Xiaolian obviously didn't expect her to ask this kind of question. She was only slightly stunned and then answered, "This servant has been in the Defense Division's residence for almost 8 years. Wasn't it 8 years? When she was 7 years old, her mother passed away. The Defense Division's residence changed owners and Madame Sue took power. Although she was still alive, she was raised to be a good-for-nothing. She looked on helplessly as there was enmity that couldn't be avenged, injustice that couldn't be heard. So it turned out that 8 years had already passed." Hellion Vivian took a deep breath. It was as if she could feel a slight chill in her breath. The more it was like this, the more harmless her smile became. "I'll accept these accessories. When I go back, I'll tell Madame Sue that I, Hellion Vivian, thank her for taking care of me all these years." Xiaolian wrinkled her eyebrows as she watched Hellion Vivian's departing figure. She felt that the other party's words just now had a hidden meaning behind them. However, after carefully thinking about how this trash had handled matters previously, Xiaolian felt relieved. It wasn't that she hadn't heard of it before, and had also heard of Hellion Vivian's recent deeds. However, no matter how formidable she was, she still hadn't made any progress in the area of handling matters. This kind of character that didn't care about the consequences of others was the easiest to fall for other people's tricks. No matter how she looked at it, she only had some martial talent and didn't have the slightest bit of other things. Such a little girl dared to make things difficult for Miss Jiao Er. She was simply acting recklessly. In the past, Madame had disdained to deal with her because she was simply flattering her to death, causing this girl to live in a fog. Now that this girl actually didn't want to live like this, then her time of death had arrived. Xiaolian lowered her eyes, which were imprinted with a venomous intent. "Madam." Su Yenemo, who was walking among the crowd, slowed down her pace. Little Lien leaned over and said in a low voice, "This servant has already given the jewelry box to that girl according to Madame's instructions." It was just as Madame had expected. That girl would never refuse money. Su Yenemo turned the prayer beads in her hand. The setting sun fell, covering the entire temple's radiance. The night gradually enveloped the temple. After the rain, the temple unexpectedly appeared a little gloomy. After the vegetarian meal, according to the rules of the past, the students could rest. They could also go to the other courtyard to burn incense and divine their marriage. After waiting for the retired emperor to finish praying for blessings, only then would they go to the pavilion to appreciate poems. Hellion Vivian had just walked to the side room she was staying in. She casually picked up the teapot on the wooden table, wanting to pour a cup of water, when she heard a knock on the door from outside. Opening the door, she saw Chan Wenwan, who was riding in the same carriage as her today, standing outside the door with an umbrella in her hand. She changed her clothes and said in a low voice, "Sister, it's time to make a move." A heavy downpour came crashing down. Left with no choice, all the students put on cloaks and brought paper umbrellas into the main hall. It was inevitable that they would be disrespectful to the gods, but the retired emperor wasn't an unreasonable person. Seeing that the rain was so heavy outside, he simply ordered Eunuch Sun to call everyone to the side hall to save them from being drenched. The little eunuch who passed on the message was the one who arranged the carriage for Hellion Vivian. He shook his head. "It's really strange. Why is the rain so heavy this year? I've never seen such heavy rain in the past." "Isn't it just a rain? You're making it sound a little too bizarre." Another one disagreed. The little eunuch's eyes turned, pretending to be serious. "How is it bizarre? Look at the trees by the side of the road when we came. They were so thick, but they were broken. According to the folklore, this is a sign of great evil." "Really?" That person looked left and right, feeling his whole body turn cold. The little eunuch lowered his voice. "Generally speaking, Women aren't allowed to enter the temple. However, these young ladies all have precious bodies, so there shouldn't be any problems. I'm just afraid that some of them are fated to be the bane of others, offending the Buddha. When you say it like that, it does make some sense. Under the eaves, the two people whispered, so it was hard to avoid being overheard by others. Under this kind of atmosphere, both men and women love to gossip. They just happened to use this matter as a starting point. The more they talked, the more excited they became, and the more outrageous they became. Hellion Vivian stood at the side, leaning against the window. Looking at the pouring rain outside, she lightly wrinkled her eyebrows. She didn't know if it was because of the bad weather, but ever since she entered the temple, Hellion Vivian felt that she couldn't figure out what was going on. It was probably because Yuan Ming was asleep again. Without his annoying voice, she really couldn't get used to it. This time it wasn't because he wanted to cultivate, but because the devil and Buddha were always at odds. Younger sister, retired emperor is about to come out. Watch carefully. Chan Wenwan stood at Hellion Vivian's side, quietly reminding her, "Don't forget the thing I gave you." Hellion Vivian faintly grunted, then stood up straight. The wooden door opened. Abbot Fengzhang led retired emperor and his entourage out. He put his palms together, not the least bit of the irascibility he had when he first entered the mountain. Instead, he had the demeanor of a great master, with a compassionate heart. Amitba, Shanzai, retired emperor is wholeheartedly devoted to Buddha. This is my Buddhist sect's great fortune. Great master is too courteous. Retired emperor also put his palms together, returning the courtesy towards Abbot Fengzhang. The smile on his face was very tolerant and magnanimous. Abbot Fengzhang laughed, then continued to lead the way. According to your habits every year, this old monk has already had people prepare spring water and green tea. Please. I'm also old. I only love the great master's peace and quiet here. This time I've brought a few more people. Great master, please don't find it annoying. Retired emperor said as he walked outside. Great master, please take a look. Which girl here has a good fate? That grandson of mine is also about to be decided. Chapter 185. Head Abbot Fengzhang glared, smelly. Know what this old monk means is, the royal family's fortune fills the heavens, and they have good karma. Whoever marries him will be unlucky. If this kind of man marries over, won't she be angered to death? Moreover, will that stinky brat have a wedding night? Ha ha ha, who knows, his face will turn black halfway through. How could retired emperor not know that Abbot Fengzhang wanted to say stinky brat? However, he didn't expose him. Instead, he smiled meaningfully. Then we'll have to rely on great master's auspicious words. Let's go, don't let those juniors wait anxiously. There wasn't much time to go from the main hall to the side hall, only a dozen or so steps away. When the students saw retired emperor come out, they bowed one after another. Just as retired emperor was about to tell everyone to rise, he heard a dong sound. It seemed like something had fallen onto the ground. Because of the excessive silence in the temple, the sound was extremely ear-piercing. Everyone looked towards the source of the sound, stopping on Hellion Vivian's body. Hellion Vivian glanced sideways, squinting her eyes at Chan Wenwan who was standing beside her. Chan Wenwan acted as if she didn't see Hellion Vivian's gaze, her face revealing an astonished expression. Wei, why do you have so many things on your body? Hellion Vivian's lips curled into a cold smile, her arms crossed in front of her chest. What I have on my body, isn't Big Sister Chan clearer than anyone else? If it wasn't for her earlier bump, how could these things have fallen? It was agreed upon that when the time came, she would bump into Hellion Jiaoer. However, the one who was bumped into was her. It was truly a good play. It's nothing more than some jewelry, little sister can just pick it up. As she spoke, Chan Wenwan bent down. Then as if she had seen something extremely frightening, her entire body trembled. What is this? Originally, the noise just now had already attracted retired emperor's attention. Now that Chan Wenwan was acting like this, it naturally had an effect. Retired emperor walked over with a group of ministers, frowning deeply as he asked, "What's going on?" "No, nothing's going on." The more Chan Wenwan acted like this, the more suspicious people became. The retired emperor narrowed his eyes and was about to walk over. The Hellion Jiaoer was stunned as she looked at the things on the ground. This jade bracelet, this pendant. Aren't these all Mother's? Big sister, why are you wearing Mother's jewelry? Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows and laughed. Which mother are you talking about? What is that? Hellion Jiaoer didn't care what Hellion Vivian answered. She stepped back and said, Witchwood, you actually brought Witchwood into the temple. Hearing this, everyone sucked in a breath of air. No wonder there have been so many strange things happening all day. It turns out that someone is causing trouble. She's still wearing Madame Sue's jewelry. She must have been cursing Madame Sue the entire time. This Hellion Vivian is really bold. If it were me, I wouldn't even dare to touch those evil things. Just wait and see. The retired emperor won't forgive her. Originally, she came to pray for blessings. Bringing such an evil thing into the temple, no matter how sincere she is, she won't get any good news. At this time, the retired emperor had already walked over. His long sleeves brought out waves of coldness. His eyes swept over the piece of black wood that exposed the yellow cloth on the ground. His face sank. Who brought this in? For a moment, the side hall was incomparably quiet. Chun Wenwan lowered her eyes. Her voice was just like her person, very gentle. Reporting to the retired emperor, these all fell from the eldest Hellion Mississippi. The retired emperor's eyes suddenly sharpened as he looked towards Hellion Vivian. Hellion Vivian didn't deny it. Just now I was bumped by Big Sister Chun. That's why the jewelry fell and disturbed the temple's peace. Asking the retired emperor for forgiveness. Chun Wenwan's eyes drooped. Feeling wronged, she said, Little sister, you're saying it as if I deliberately bumped into you. But now that things have come to this, Big Sister doesn't care what Little Sister thinks. Only how could Little Sister bring such a malicious thing into the mountain? What if it harmed someone? A piece of wood, a few pieces of jewelry, who could harm? After Hellion Vivian finished speaking, she wanted to go pick up the scattered objects on the ground. Hellion Jiaoer stepped forward and pressed down on her wrist. She seemed to have been angered by something. Her eyes were completely red. Big sister, I admit that I've always treated you well. But now I can't shield you. The pieces of jewelry you're talking about, every one of them belonged to my mother. That piece of wood on the ground is the world's most vicious piece of wood. If you don't give me an explanation, I won't let it go. Explanation? Hellion Vivian smiled. These pieces of jewelry were given to me by Xiaolian during the meal. She said it was your mother's dowry for me. Hellion Jiaoer tilted her head, as if she was pondering something. Soon after, she said to the Emperor Emeritus, In order to investigate this matter clearly, I ask Emperor Emeritus to allow this commoner to call Xiaolian in. The Emperor Emeritus raised his eyebrows and said with a smile, Summon Xiaolian into the hall. Head Abbot Fengzhang stood to the side. When he saw this scene, he couldn't help but sigh. These kinds of methods were commonly seen in prestigious families before he had converted to Buddhism. This kind of situation clearly showed that there was someone who wanted to mess with that girl. He reckoned that letting that servant girl called Xiaolian in would only make the situation worse. The intelligent Beligaju naturally saw through this situation. His long and narrow eyes narrowed as he said in a cold tone, It's only a few items that dropped. Is there a need to make such a big fuss? Head Abbot Fengzhang picked his ears in astonishment. He didn't hear wrong, right? This brat was speaking up for that girl? How was that possible? How could he speak up for a girl? It must be that this brat felt vexed and thought that the investigation would be more troublesome. That's why he said this. The Hellion Jiaoer also thought the same. She bashfully smiled at Beligaju. Your Highness, it's not a big fuss. It's just that your Highness doesn't understand the insidious nature of this gumu. This matter must be investigated clearly. Beligaju didn't speak again. He only raised his eyes and glanced at the Hellion Jiaoer. That glance didn't have any warmth, breaking all of his elegance. It was like a snake hibernating in the underbrush, so cold that it made people tremble with fear. Hellion Jiaoer indescribably shivered and shifted her line of sight. Her gaze fell on little Lian, who was just walking in. It was originally arranged so Xiaolian wasn't very far away. She stood outside the side hall and waited, only waiting for the summons. This servant Xiaolian greets Emperor Emeritus. Long live Emperor Emeritus. Xiaolian knelt on the ground with proper etiquette, lovable and gentle. The Emperor Emeritus waved his sleeve. Stand up. After he finished speaking, the Emperor Emeritus glanced at the Hellion Jiaoer. If there's anything, you can ask her yourself. The Hellion Jiaoer said yes. She didn't waste time and bluntly asked, Shalian, let me ask you. Did you give the jewelry on the ground that belonged to mother to eldest sister during the vegetarian meal? Reporting to Miss, this servant did indeed follow Madam's orders to give eldest Miss a bag of jewelry during the vegetarian meal. After Shalian finished speaking, she pretended to be puzzled and tilted her head. But in that bag of jewelry, most of it was hair ornaments and hair ornaments, not the ones on the ground. She was lying. Hellion Vivian's pupils constricted, her gaze also gradually darkening. Chapter 186. Eldest sister, what else do you have to say now? Hellion Jiaoer abruptly turned her head. Her pair of beautiful eyes looked at Hellion Vivian as if she was looking at a heartless thief. How mother treated you, everyone saw it with their own eyes, yet you treated mother like this. Not only did you not consider her good, but you even got the witch wood and her jewelry to put a curse on her. Eldest sister, you're so ruthless. This time it could be said that the evidence was conclusive. Shalian's answer further proved Hellion Vivian's crime. Everyone looked at Hellion Vivian. That kind of gaze was like she was a poisonous woman. Retired Emperor's face also carried a bit of displeasure. He didn't expect that during this trip to Hidden Spirit Temple, someone would dare to use the goo in front of him. Nothing had happened yet Hellion family's girl dared to do this kind of thing. Wait until they arrived at the palace, then it would be terrible. Even if someone set a trap for her to fall into, that would also be bad luck. Retired Emperor wrinkled his thick eyebrows, his voice heavy as he said to Hellion Vivian, "What else do you want to say?" Hellion Vivian faintly smiled. This servant girl's jewelry was indeed given to me by this servant girl. This servant girl doesn't understand why she would lie, but there is one thing I ask retired Emperor to investigate clearly. Eldest Miss, even if this servant girl is a servant girl, this servant also understands what is called propriety, justice, integrity, and shame. Don't wrongly accuse this servant. Shalian felt wronged and her eyes reddened. Those tears fell on her small egg-like face, actually somewhat delicate and pitiful. Hellion Vivian took a step forward, reached out and pinched her lower jaw. Tilting her head, she curved her thin lips, then slapped her. Slap. That kind of crisp sound reverberated in the side chamber, appearing particularly ear-piercing. Not only was Shalian stunned by the slap, even Eunuch's son next to retired Emperor was also shocked. According to reason, under this kind of situation, shouldn't she apologize to retired Emperor as soon as possible? This eldest Miss Hellion not only didn't apologize, but also slapped that servant girl. Such an arrogant hedonist. Did she want retired Emperor to give her the death penalty? Shalian never thought that Hellion Vivian would be so bold as to slap her in front of the Emperor Emeritus. She was Madame Su's head maidservant and had been in the general's residence for so many years. She lived a more comfortable life than some of the young misses in the capital. When had she ever been bullied like this? Shalian's entire body trembled. She was so angry that she couldn't even utter a single word. The retired Emperor didn't expect this result and was about to fly into a rage. She then heard Wei Wei's tone of voice faintly say, "I'm talking with retired Emperor. When did it become your turn to interrupt? Or is it to say, based on your looks, you can also make retired Emperor unable to distinguish right from wrong and punish me for no reason at all?" As soon as her voice fell, the people around her sucked in a breath of cold air. This was especially true for Eunuch's son, who was standing at the side. Even his hands were trembling. This Hellion Vivian really had guts. She actually dared to say such a thing. How could the retired Emperor not understand? These words were simply meant for him to hear. In a split second, his face turned green as he continuously spat out a few words, "Good, good, good." The eldest young miss of the Hellion family is truly as she said. Rude and unreasonable, unbridled, and disregarding the consequences. This old man wants to listen carefully. When did I not distinguish right from wrong? The retired Emperor doesn't need to be so angry. Sometimes when a person's acting skills are too good, it's indeed hard to see through them. What's more, you're also old. It's hard to avoid seeing things wrongly for a moment. Hellion Vivian smiled faintly. No matter who was standing in front of her, that queenly air didn't diminish in the slightest. Apart from his own treasured grandson, there was no one else who dared to anger him like this. The retired emperor sneered. Hellion Vivian, do you know that based on these words of yours, this emperor can take your life? Of course, Wei Wei believes in the majesty of the emperor. Hellion Vivian's tone changed. However, in my heart, the retired emperor has always been a wise and discerning monarch. You wouldn't casually take someone's life. I won't hide it from the retired emperor. When I was young, I worshipped you the most, retired emperor. The retired emperor stared blankly. How could one give a person a slap and then give a red date? How the fuck was he supposed to call someone to drag her out and behead her? Cough cough. Head Abbot Fengzhang, who was standing to one side, wanted to laugh when he heard this. Unfortunately, there weren't many occasions, so he could only pretend to clear his throat. In fact, Head Abbot Fengzhang especially wanted to ask, where did this girl pop out from? Why was she the same as that stinky brat? When she spoke, it made people feel both hateful and itchy, yet they couldn't do anything to her. Thinking about this, Head Abbot Fengzhang looked towards a certain person and saw that person slightly narrowed his eyes. His black jade-like pupils carried a thick sense of danger. Head Abbot Fengzhang furrowed his brows in puzzlement. Why did this stinky brat have such a strong murderous aura? No one provoked him, right? Could it be that it was because that girl's words offended the retired emperor? While Head Abbot Fengzhang was still guessing on this side, Hellion Jiaoer had already opened her mouth. Lian, who was stroking Xiaolian, spoke in an indignant tone. Big sister, you're going too far. Do you think that just because you said that, the retired emperor will spare you? You cursed my mother. Xiaolian only spoke the truth, yet you beat her up like this. Is there still justice in this world? Saying this, Hellion Jiaoer walked in front of the retired emperor, and heavily knelt on the ground with a pause sound. Retired emperor. Xiaolian has followed my mother for more than 10 years and has never done anything wrong. Yet she ended up like this. Jiaoer earnestly asks the retired emperor to give this commoner girl justice. Hearing this, the retired emperor pressed the space between his eyebrows. He didn't even look at Hellion Vivian again. He waved his long sleeve, annoyed and somewhat perfunctory. He originally wasn't like this. After all, that grandson of his had never asked for anything. However, this Hellion Vivian really made people not dare to compliment her. This kind of vicious and merciless girl, how could he feel at ease leaving her by his grandson's side? Shadow, who was following beside Beligaju, saw the retired emperor wave his hand. His footsteps paused, and he subconsciously looked towards His Highness. However, before Beligaju could open his mouth, Hellion Vivian chuckled. Younger sister keeps on cursing. Just now, I wanted to ask younger sister. You only saw a corner of that piece of wood and didn't know what was written on it. Yet you insist that the wood on my body was which wood? Younger sister, how much do you want the retired emperor to punish me? That's why you spared no effort. Hellion Vivian said the last sentence very indifferently. However, in Hellion Jiaoer's ears it was extremely stupid. She was still defending herself in this kind of situation. It was truly laughable. Could it be that she couldn't see that in this kind of situation, no matter what she said, the retired emperor wouldn't spare her? Servant Xiaolian also thought so. She sneered in her heart, but her face was tearful. Eldest miss, something has happened. It doesn't matter if you wrongly accuse me. After all, I'm just a servant. Even if you wrongly accuse me to death, it's not worth anything. However, Miss Jiaoer's heart is kind and pure. Yet you say this about her. Eldest miss, you've really gone too far. Chapter 187. This wasn't just excessive, it was simply malicious. The young misses and young masters of aristocratic families all looked at Hellion Vivian with disgust. Their glances were so hateful that they immediately punished this evil woman. Hellion Vivian. Wrongly accused? Hellion Vivian smiled, her voice neither fast nor slow. Whether or not you were wrongly accused, it doesn't matter what you say. You have to find a witness. As she spoke, she raised her eyes and bowed towards Head Abbot Fengzhang. Great Master, ever since this commoner entered the temple, this commoner's heart has been uneasy. After receiving this jewelry bag, This commoner immediately asked the young master by your side to consecrate this commoner's jewelry for the sake of warding off evil spirits and praying for blessings. I didn't expect that it would now become evidence to prove this commoner's innocence. Would it be possible for the young master to enter the hall now? What? Xiaolian raised her eyes in disbelief. That small tear-stained face instantly paled. The Emperor Emeritus frowned but didn't say anything. Head Abbot Fengzhang saw Helian Vivian's calm and quiet eyes looking at him. She claimed to be from a sect where the cool breeze comes naturally, the sea of clouds doesn't move. He felt that this matter was quite interesting, so he smiled, of course. Wudao, go call Wufan over. Yes, Abbot. The little monk accepted the order. Not long after, he brought someone in. Abbot, you were looking for me? This old monk wasn't looking for you. It was this benefactress who was looking for you. The little monk followed Head Abbot Fengzhang's gaze and looked over. After seeing that it was Helian Vivian, a bashful expression appeared on his fair face. Benefactress, it's you? It's me. Helian Vivian put her palms together and greeted politely. Little master, look at the things on the ground. Are they the jewelry that I asked you to consecrate just now? The little monk didn't understand why she asked this. Looking at the jade pendants and bracelets scattered all over the ground, he couldn't help but sigh. Umitba, consecration is the gospel given by Buddha. How could benefactress not know how to cherish it? Little master, you've misunderstood. It's not that she doesn't know how to cherish them. It's that someone wants to frame her. They deliberately bumped into her and insisted that she stole these things. A deep and ruminating voice sounded from the side of the door. Everyone looked over, only to see Hei's, who hadn't said a word all this while, lazily leaning against the wooden door. He crossed his arms over his chest and raised his eyes, his gaze indifferent. As soon as Hei's finished speaking, not only did Xiaolian's entire body tremble, even Chen Wenwan's face paled as she took a large step back. Why? Why did young Master He speak up for that woman? The little monk was stunned for a moment before he answered instinctively. These things all belong to that female benefactor. As he spoke, he pointed at Xiaolian and then at Helian Vivian. I gave it to this benefactress. This poor monk was right outside the room at the time and saw it with his own eyes. How can you say that I stole it? That is to say, someone really did lie, and kept saying that he was wronged and had a sense of propriety. Hei's glanced at Xiaolian with a faint smile. Madame Su's maidservant has truly opened this young master's eyes. With a snap sound, the jade bracelet in Xiaolian's hand fell to the ground, shattering into pieces. Her eyes shook as she tried her best to suppress the panic on her face. She never would have thought that this woman would ask someone to consecrate these accessories right after she left. Was this still that uncivilized girl who didn't understand anything in the past? Since when did she have such a deep scheming heart? Xiaolian raised her head and looked over, only to see Helian Vivian looking at her with a faint smile. However, there wasn't the slightest trace of a smile in those eyes. Suddenly, she seemed to have understood something, and an unprecedented fear flashed through the depths of her eyes. No, it couldn't be. She couldn't possibly be that smart. But the things she did made it so that she couldn't help but think in that direction. Since this woman had asked the little monk to consecrate these accessories, why didn't she just directly ask the little monk to identify these accessories, instead of calling her over first? Only after she had lied according to Madame's instructions did that woman say that she had actually already asked someone to consecrate these accessories. Was she overthinking things? Why did she feel that all of this was a deliberate trap set up by Helian Vivian? It was all for the sake of beating them at their own game and dragging them all in. Otherwise, Helian Vivian could have called the little monk out to prove her innocence at the start. She wouldn't have had to make such an unnecessary move like this. When Xiaolian thought of this, her entire body inexplicably shuddered. She looked at Helian Vivian with a trembling body, as if she was looking at a demon. However, Chen Wenwan, who hadn't experienced this kind of scheming, still hadn't seen through the situation. She only glanced in Hei's direction, her white teeth tightly biting her red lips. Young master saying this, isn't it too early to come to a conclusion? The little monk said that he consecrated Wei Wei Mimi, but who saw it? That pitiful servant girl even said that she sent over something else. There's no one to prove it, so how can you say that it was the servant girl who lied and not someone else who deceived her? Hazy still didn't speak. That little monk got angry, saying with a red face and thick neck, "Benefactress, monks don't lie. I'm a Buddhist disciple, and I disdain lying to deceive others. If you don't believe me, you can have head abbot Fangzhang smell it. As long as an object has been consecrated, it will leave behind a sandalwood fragrance for an entire night." Ha ha ha, this old monk's disciple is right. Head abbot Fangzhang laughed heartily. He directly leaned over and picked up one of the jade bracelets, placing it under his nose and smelling it. "It's indeed been consecrated." The little monk heavily snorted at Chen Wenwan, as if saying, "You can slander me, but you can't slander my character as a monk. Monks don't lie." After seeing this scene, everyone turned silent. Their gazes couldn't help but turn towards Xiaolian. After a servant girl delivered the accessories, she actually lied. Everyone wasn't a fool, and naturally guessed that this matter wasn't so simple. Their gazes towards the Hellion Jiao also carried guesses. How could Hellion Jiao endure this kind of gaze? With a paw sound, she slapped little Lian's face with the back of her hand, as if she hated iron for not becoming steel. Her thin lips slightly trembled. "Mother and I trusted you so much. How could you speak without thinking?" That slap was much more ruthless than the one that the Hellion Vivian had given her. When the Hellion Vivian had slapped her, she hadn't thought of slapping her until she couldn't speak anymore. After all, this play had no meaning without Xiaolian. The Hellion Jiao, on the other hand, slapped her, bringing along a buzzing sound of martial qi. Xiaolian's entire face was swollen, blood seeping out from the corner of her mouth. Not to mention opening her mouth to speak, even maintaining a kneeling position was a bit difficult. She also didn't dare to say anything, only continuously kowtowing, begging the Emperor Emeritus for forgiveness. It was this servant who let Miss and Madam down. It's just that eldest Miss's usual arrogance is too great. This servant couldn't bear to see it, and thus lied. The Hellion Vivian calmly listened, her thin lips indifferently hooking up. Was she trying to separate Madame Su from the Hellion Jiao? Chapter 188. How could it be that easy? She had said before that she, Hellion Vivian, was someone who would not offend others unless they offended her. If they offended her, she would eliminate them completely. If they wanted to scheme against her, since they were already here, then they shouldn't think of leaving so easily. Hellion Vivian played with the jade bracelet in her hand, her tone indifferent. "You have indeed let down your Miss and Madam." Xiaolian lowered her eyes and didn't say anything else. She understood better than anyone that in this current situation, as long as she could protect Madam and Miss, the Emperor Emeritus would only treat her as a mere servant girl who told a lie and deal with her. However, if Madam and the rest were implicated, then it wouldn't just be a matter of lying. It would be a well-planned crime of deceiving the Emperor. Thus, when she heard Hellion Vivian's words, she secretly sighed in relief, thinking that this matter would end like this. Who would have thought that Hellion Vivian's next words would be, "Because you didn't do a single thing that they entrusted you with. You even let me have a handle on you. If this isn't letting them down, then what is?" Xiaolian's body shook heavily, then she raised her eyes. "The matter of lying was all my own idea. It has nothing to do with Miss and Madam. They also didn't instruct me to do anything." "You're quite loyal, knowing how to protect your master." Hellion Vivian indifferently smiled. "It's just that the person you're protecting doesn't seem to think that way. Otherwise, she wouldn't have used her martial qi when she slapped you. It's obvious that she's anxious to silence you." As she spoke, she looked towards the Hellion Jiao. "Don't you think so, younger sister?" The Hellion Jiao clenched her hands, but her expression didn't change in the slightest. If Xiaolian's plan didn't work, then there was still Chen Wenwan's plan. Chen Wenwan admired He Zhe, and the reason why the Chen family could come to the capital was because of their Su family. Long before they entered the temple, her mother had already planned everything. They never thought that Hellion Vivian would really get on that carriage. It was only for the sake of giving Chen Wenwan a chance to get close to Hellion Vivian. Now that the Witchwood they planned was on the ground, no matter how many links there were, as long as this was there, Hellion Vivian would definitely die. Thinking to this point, the Hellion Jiao sensibly took a step forward, her voice gentle and magnanimous. "When a servant made a mistake, of course, it's natural to punish them. Eldest sister suspecting me and mother, it's fine. But, the main point of this matter, eldest sister, why you brought the witchwood, this kind of witchwood? What Miss Jiao says is correct. After such a ruckus, Chen Wenwan's jealousy towards Hellion Vivian grew even more. However, she concealed it very well, so much so that there was even a trace of trembling in her voice, as if she still had lingering fears from what she had just seen. Facing retired emperor, she said, "Retired emperor's trip this time was for the sake of praying for rain and blessing for the wastelands of the northern desert. Only then did you come to Hidden Spirit Temple to bathe, burn incense, and eat vegetarian food for a day, all for the sake of displaying your sincerity. However, there was someone who brought witchwood along, ready to harm people at any moment. This kind of insidious method, not only did it ruin retired emperor's sincerity, it also ruined the fortune of the wastelands of the northern desert." As she spoke, she looked towards Hellion Vivian. Although Wenwan's family background is low, I have to say this. Miss Weiwei wants to rely on a servant girl to divert everyone's attention, but it's completely useless. This witchwood harms people, there's no way Miss Weiwei doesn't know. Then why do you still carry it along with you? Hellion Vivian cast a sidelong glance towards Chen Wenwan. I don't know how I've offended Miss Chen, to make Miss Chen be so overbearing towards me. Before entering the temple, Miss Chen still called me younger sister, younger sister. After entering the temple, you can't wait to see if I'm that wicked beyond redemption person. Then shouldn't I be suspicious of Miss Chen's original purpose for approaching me? Miss Hellion, you actually look at me like this. Chen Wenwan's eyes shook, as if there was a glimmer of water swirling within. Outside the temple, I saw that you met with difficulties, so I let you enter my carriage. Now Miss Hellion unexpectedly said that I had an ulterior motive. As she spoke, she tilted her head and used the handkerchief in her hand to wipe the corners of her eyes, appearing extremely wronged. Hellion Jiao shook her head and looked towards Hellion Vivian with condemnation in her eyes. Eldest sister, I really don't understand how the current you became like this. We helped you, yet you feel that we have an ulterior motive. You're jealous of us in your heart, so you brought those things that can't be brought to the table. Eldest sister, you don't know how much this younger sister's heart hurts seeing you like this. The thing on the ground hasn't been picked up yet you and Miss Chen insist that it's witchwood. Hellion Vivian smiled, traces of coldness entering her eyes. You're really a good younger sister. I've never seen a younger sister who's so eager for her older sister to die. As she spoke, Hellion Vivian bent down and picked up that piece of witchwood that was still hidden in the yellow cloth bag. She lightly pushed it up, and that piece of witchwood was completely exposed. This is the witchwood that you keep on talking about. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows and smiled. I'll have to ask Eunuch Sun to step forward and see whether or not this is an evil thing that harms people. Hellion Jiao was the closest to Hellion Vivian. Now that she clearly saw the words engraved on that piece of sandalwood, her expression suddenly changed greatly, and all of a sudden she was somewhat flustered. Eunuch Sun also stared blankly. What kind of witchwood was wrapped in that yellow cloth? There wasn't cinnabar, there wasn't the 8 characters of birth, and there wasn't even any witchcraft. On the wood, there was a set of words quietly engraved. The momentum was ingenious, the shape was dense, the strength was good, and the spirit was calm and refined. Each word was very scribbled, yet it also penetrated deep into the bone. The country is prosperous and the people are at peace. For simple words, yet it made Eunuch Sun take another look at Hellion Vivian. Nowadays there were very few women in the world who could have such a breadth of mind. He couldn't help but smile. Miss Hellion can be this magnanimous, truly makes this old servant admire you. If this old servant's guess isn't wrong, this ought to be the Hidden Spirit Temple's incense wood. It's been exposed to the smell of incense all year round, and can concentrate and nourish the eyes. Only, I don't know how Miss Hellion obtained this piece of incense wood. Once Eunuch Sun's voice fell, the people present were in an uproar. Wasn't it witchwood? How did it become incense wood? Incense wood. Chen Wenwan was even more shocked. Turning her head to look, her lips were pale and somewhat trembling. How was this possible? That yellow cloth was clearly something she handed over to Hellion Vivian. Inside that cloth was witchwood engraved with curse words. How could it become incense wood? Eunuch Sun, could it be that you saw wrongly? Chen Wenwan panicked, anxiously wanting to take a step forward to take a closer look. Hellion Vivian's body moved to the side, blocking in front of her. Her lips curved into a light smile. Miss Chun, how much do you hope that this is a piece of witch wood? So much so that you don't even believe Eunuch Sun's words. Hellion Vivian. Chun Wenwan took a deep breath. Don't speak nonsense. I'm only afraid that Eunuch Sun's eyes were blurred for a moment and made a mistake, letting the wicked go. Chapter 189. She bit her lip, still wanting to say something. But then she heard a deep and indifferent voice, languid and extremely sexy. You don't believe in Eunuch Sun's eyesight, but what about this highness? Beligaju walked out from the deep shadows. His elegant figure appeared exceptionally handsome under the contrast of the fur cloak. His eyebrows and eyelashes were deep, his black eyes were deep, and his temperament was outstanding, so cold that it made people terrified. Chun Wenwan's entire body trembled. Her legs were so weak that she wanted to kneel on the ground. Seeing this, the Emperor Emeritus wrinkled his brows, his expression also becoming cold. Bring the thing over. Yes. Eunuch Sun raised his hands high, presenting the incense wood. When he saw the words engraved on the incense wood, the Emperor Emeritus's eyes flashed. He turned his head to look at Hellion Vivian. This is... Hellion Vivian smiled faintly. Weiwei said that she worships Emperor Emeritus very much. During this time of drought, you personally went up the mountain to pray for blessings. Weiwei admires your concern for the country and the people. A commoner woman is light and weak, so there's not much to do. I only heard that the incense wood in this hidden spirit temple will grant one's wishes, so I had the little monk bring me to a side courtyard to ask for one. The little monk stood beside Hellion Vivian and nodded his head heavily. He chanted Umitba before saying, Benefactress walked all the way here, going up 199 steps and kowtowed a total of 990 times. With such sincerity, Buddha will definitely bless you with good news. Holding the incense wood in his hand, the Emperor Emeritus felt as if he had been slapped in the face. After a moment of silence, he turned to look at Hellion Vivian. For the first time, his usually calm eyes carried an apologetic expression. Good child, you're very considerate. Having heard what was said, Hellion Jiao Er's complexion became exceptionally unsightly. She abruptly clenched both of her hands, then slowly released them again. She suddenly realized that no matter if it was her, Little Lien or Chun Wenwan, they'd all been duped by Weiwei. Before they entered the temple, Hellion Vivian had expected everything. She had held back, not because she was flustered, but because she was waiting for them to walk right into her trap. At this moment the Hellion Jiao regretted to the extreme. The woman in front of her was really different from before. Not only was her martial chi different, but she was also scheming. Originally, she wanted to frame her in front of the Emperor Emeritus, so that she could completely infuriate the Emperor Emeritus and never have the chance to make a comeback. Now she had unintentionally paved the way for that woman. After such an incident, the Emperor Emeritus would definitely feel guilty towards Hellion Vivian. In the future, he might even take care of her. Thinking of this, the Hellion Jiao's heart was filled with hatred. She forcefully bit through the thin flesh in her mouth. Her mouth was full of blood, but she had no choice but to swallow it down. Hellion Vivian looked at her and smiled faintly. Now that I've proven my innocence, I have something I want to ask little sister and Miss Chun. I clearly have a piece of incense wood on me, so why did you say it was witchwood without even looking at it? What is the reason for this? Chun Wenwan's thin and colorless lips couldn't say a single word. Hellion Jiao forced a smile. From a distance, that incense would look similar to witchwood. That's why little sister thought. Little sister. Hellion Vivian calmly interrupted her words. You want to tell me that this is all a misunderstanding? Hellion Jiao nodded, the rims of her eyes slightly red. I've wronged big sister. We really did see wrongly. Saw wrongly? I think it's little sister who doesn't understand why the witchwood you put on me would turn into a piece of incense wood, right? After Hellion Vivian said this, she turned to look at the Emperor Emeritus. I won't hide it from the Emperor Emeritus. I really do have a piece of witchwood here. What? Everyone looked at each other in dismay. They really didn't understand why this Hellion Vivian, who had just removed herself from the rumors of the witchwood, would personally admit that she had a piece of witchwood. However, only Chun Wenwan realized what she was going to say, and her entire person stood up. Hellion Vivian lightly swept a glance at her and continued, "Only, this piece of witch wood was given to me by Miss Chan before entering the temple." "Hellion Vivian, don't make slanderous accusations." Chun Wenwan furiously roared. That kind of twisted little face didn't have the slightest bit of gentleness from before. Hellion Vivian smiled, her eyes shining as if they were covered with a layer of dazzling light. "Miss Chun, the ones making slanderous accusations from start to finish were you guys. Why do you think I wanted to cooperate with you and get on your carriage? I just wanted to see what kind of tricks you were going to play. I really didn't expect that Madame Su, in order to deal with me, would actually send a young miss from an aristocratic family. Miss Chun, you're not a student from White Academy who's participating in this year's exam, yet you appeared in the entourage. Presumably, only the Su family, who can cover the sky with one hand in the imperial court, can help you do this. Only you've underestimated me too much. You want to kill me with just a piece of witch wood? You really think I, Hellion Vivian, am still that year when I let you bully me, the orphan child who can't speak?" As she spoke, Hellion Vivian took a step forward and heavily kneeled on the ground. Her voice was louder than Hellion Vivian's kneeling, and more solid. The instant her long skirt fell to the ground, it practically stirred up the water on the ground. The drizzle drizzled, and the evening wind gusted. Hellion Vivian raised her head, her long sleeves fluttering in the wind. "Retired Emperor, that year my grandfather was 60 years old. In order to protect the Dragon War Empire's territory, he overturned the border with his army and dyed the mountains with blood. He brandished a war blade and spread the spirit of war. Therefore, you conferred my Hellion bloodline as the Defense Department, meaning to protect the family for the country and wholeheartedly serve the people. But unfortunately, I've been a good-for-nothing since childhood. I don't have a grandfather, nor do I have a mother. Even the position of the head of the family was given to someone else. Therefore, I deserve to be bullied and humiliated, cursed as a barbaric profligate. After all, I lost my own family business." As Hellion Vivian spoke, her back was very straight. Although she was in a kneeling position, she gave everyone a kind of indescribable handsomeness. "But now that I've grown up, I understand what honor and disgrace are. I don't want to let people smear my reputation like this, and not say anything. I think that year, when my grandfather brandished his blade to protect the family and the country, it wasn't for the day that I would stand here and be schemed against for no reason. When I was young, he would hold me in his arms. The sentence he said the most was, 'Yaoer, when you grow up, you must become a top-notch martial chi master and follow by retired emperor's side. Only this way can you protect my Dragon War Empire and ensure the prosperity of the people.' All these years, no matter what happened, I've always remembered these words. I thought that when I reached a certain height, I would tell you these words. But now it seems that you may not want to hear them. After all, the current head of the Defense Department is also surnamed Su. Retired Emperor, you also have misgivings." Retired Emperor looked at the small face before his eyes that was somewhat similar to Old Man Hulian's. His heart received a huge shock. He suddenly realized that previously, he wasn't willing to let his grandson marry this child. Was he really wrong? Chapter 190. He had watched that girl of the Hellion family grow up since she was a child. How could that girl's daughter be as unbearable as the rumors? It was because he had been in this position for a long time. He had heard a lot and thought a lot. He considered himself to be a wise ruler who empathized with his old generals. He had never mistreated any of the generals who had fought alongside him in the past. But today, he discovered that he had actually let the granddaughter of his greatest hero suffer endless grievances. Thinking about what happened just now, the retired emperor's heart was in turmoil. If it wasn't for this child's actions, he might not have done anything to the Su family in the end. Su family, Su family. The retired emperor took a deep breath and slammed the prayer beads he was fiddling with onto the table. Even his tone was filled with anger. "Go and call Su Shi over for this emperor." "Yes." As Eunuch Sun's voice fell, Hellion Jiaoer was like a frosted eggplant. She took a step back in a daze. When Eunuch Sun brought Madame Su over, Madame Su saw her personal maid kneeling on the ground from afar. Her heart immediately turned cold. Originally, Madame Su thought that Hellion Vivian was just a little girl and wouldn't be difficult to deal with, so she sent one of her maids to do it. Everything should have been flawless, so why was Xiaolian the one kneeling on the ground? Something must have gone wrong. The intelligent Madame Su used a few seconds to scan the faces of her beloved daughter and Chan Wenwan. However, in an instant she understood what was going on. Her first instinct was to minimize the problem. This was because this matter could be explained by the younger generation as messing around. If she was also involved, the nature of the matter would be different. Therefore, even if it was a pity, some chess pieces could only be discarded. Madame Su tightened her grip on the handkerchief in her palm, but she didn't lose her composure on the surface. She lowered her body and bowed. This subject woman pays respect to retired emperor. May this subject woman pay respect to you. The retired emperor did not ask her to get up. He just looked at her condescendingly and said in an indifferent tone, "This emperor remembers that Minister Chan, who just entered the capital recently, was promoted by your Su family. As a woman, I am not clear about the matters of the previous dynasty." Su Yanmo tightened her grip on her handkerchief to make herself look normal. Brother never talks about these things. The retired emperor narrowed his eyes. Then you don't know this Miss Chun in front of you? I've never seen him before. It was true that Su Yanmo had never met Chen Wenwan before. It was a big deal for the ministers to form cliques for personal gain. If the womenfolk were too close, it would also raise suspicions. Furthermore, her brother had just promoted the one with the surname Chan. Even if she used the Chun family, it was only through letters and had never met. If it wasn't for that little vile spawn tossing and turning around in the White Academy too fiercely this time, causing Zhao Er to lose face again and again, she wouldn't have used this chess piece buried in the White Academy in advance. The retired emperor looked at Su Yanmo's expression and knew that it would be a dead end if he continued to ask, so he simply smiled and said, "Then you don't know that your beloved daughter Hellion Jiaoer colluded with Miss Chun to harm others? There's actually such a thing?" Su Yanmo's eyes shook. She looked at Hellion Jiaoer in disbelief. "Jiaoer, who did you harm? What did I tell you on a daily basis? Your naivety will inevitably be used by others. What happened this time?" If Hellion Vivian didn't know what kind of person Madame Su was, she was afraid that she would also be deceived by her acting skills. Compared to Hellion Jiaoer, her mother was the one who had really practiced the skill of being shameless to the extreme. "Madame Su." Hellion Vivian slowly walked towards her, the corners of her mouth carrying a smile, her aura oppressing people. "I once read a book. That book wrote like this. If a person is really surprised, their facial expression can at most maintain it for 2 seconds. If it exceeds 2 seconds, it proves that this person is not really surprised but is just pretending. Madam, I've calculated the time. I'm afraid that you've maintained this expression for at least 5 seconds. Su Yanmo did not expect that the little girl who used to be so timid when she saw her would suddenly become so domineering. Thinking about the news she had received these days, she narrowed her eyes slightly and put on her usual attitude. Wei Wei, is this how you talk to the mistress of the household? Is this all you've learned in the White Academy? How dare you offend your elders? Hellion Vivian laughed. Elders? Madam has probably forgotten, but I've long been incited by your precious daughter to remove my name from the Hellion family. Now I, Hellion Wei Wei, am all alone. Other than my master, those who can be considered my elders are all in the tombs deep in the mountains. Perhaps Madam wants to go down and accompany them. If that's the case, I can consider calling you my elder." "You?" Madame Su took a deep breath. "You've really changed too quickly. You've almost made me, your mother, unable to recognize you." Hellion Vivian looked at her, the light in her eyes like ice blossoming. "Madam, do you need me to remind you that my mother, who used to treat you like a sister, had her husband stolen and her reputation ruined by you? That's why she fell ill for a long time and left this world. Before she died, you kept spreading rumors that she couldn't tolerate you. Now it seems that your beloved daughter really takes after your temperament. She doesn't know how to do other things, but she's proficient in slandering and framing people." When everyone heard this, they couldn't help but look at Madame Su, especially the remaining 2 or 3 noble young ladies. They still didn't know that there was such a thing in the capital. That incomparably noble martial chi genius, the mother of the second Miss Hellion, unexpectedly relied on this kind of method to climb up the ranks. To tell the truth, this kind of method was the most shameful thing for them. Although in this circle of Seijo City, everyone wanted to marry a good husband, but they were absolutely unwilling to do this kind of thing like stealing their own sister's husband. They really couldn't see that Madame Su was like this in the past. What Su Yenmo didn't want people to mention the most was those things in the past. Unfortunately, Hellion Vivian's every word was exposing her shortcomings. Su Yenmo couldn't wait to tear Hellion Vivian apart right now, but she couldn't do it in front of everyone. In addition, she didn't know the details of what happened here before she came, so she could only silently endure it. She turned her head to face the retired emperor and said, "Retired emperor, I know that daughter of mine. Her temperament is very weak. Could there be some kind of misunderstanding?" Misunderstanding? The retired emperor's eyes were calm and his tone was low. "Your daughter instigated Miss Chan to bring the witchwood into the temple in order to frame others. Your personal maid is kneeling here. What kind of misunderstanding do you think there could be? Not only are you full of lies, but you also frame others. Su Yenmo, is this how your Su family teaches people?" Chapter 191. Su Yenmo didn't think that the retired emperor would be so angry. She represented the Su and He families. Even if this matter was exposed, the retired emperor would control the influence of this matter to a certain extent in order to balance the court and restrain his relatives. However, today the retired emperor obviously wanted to punish severely. This caught Su Yenmo completely unprepared. She didn't know what Wei Wei actually did to make the retired emperor, who always knew how to weigh the pros and cons, make such a raging decision. She could only kneel on the ground and complain about her injustice. "Retired emperor, I wasn't here just now. I also don't know why Xiao Lian is kneeling here. As for what retired emperor said about framing others, I don't understand at all." "Good, very good." The retired emperor stood up and said, "Since you don't understand anything, then go back and tell Prime Minister Su that I want to keep a low profile on this trip to the Hidden Spirit Temple. That's why I let him handle the preparations. Seems that I've given some people convenience that they shouldn't have. In the future, he doesn't need to care about the affairs of Minghuang Palace. Just be his prime minister." These words didn't have any deterrent force. However, Su Yenmo understood that this kind of decision was to weaken the Su family's power. Her heart thumped loudly. She raised her eyes and looked at her beloved daughter, whose face was pale. No matter how unwilling she was, this was the result. She had to think of a way to protect Jiao Er. One had to know that her future was limitless. She couldn't fall in this kind of internal strife between women. Thinking of this, Madame Su kowtowed heavily and said to the Emperor Emeritus, "Emperor Emeritus, this subject knows that you are angry because of this incident. But who saw this subject's daughter instructing people? What evidence do you have?" As she spoke, Madame Su looked at Chan Wenwan. "Miss Chan, my Su family has no enmity with you. We're not close. You did something wrong. Why did the retired emperor say that you were instructed by my daughter?" Hearing this, Chan Wenwan trembled. How could she not understand that Madame Su was giving her a warning? She wanted her to judge the situation before speaking. For such a long time, the Chun family was able to climb to this point because of the Su family. Mrs. Su's meaning was obvious. Since the Su family could make the Chun family prosper, they could also ruin the Chun family. Chun Wenwan laughed out loud. Suddenly, her eyes sunk, and her voice contained pain. "This matter was all done by me alone, without anyone's instructions. She's only an ugly woman, without the slightest bit of beauty, yet she still hooks up with this and that all day long. She didn't even let young Master He off. Truly disgusting to the extreme. If I don't give this kind of person some face to see, my heart won't be at ease. It's just that I underestimated some people's thoughts. On the surface, they accepted my good intentions and were intimate with me, but in reality, they were always thinking of how to guard against me. In the end, I'm too naive. You can kill me or cut me up as you wish. You used the witchwood because you were jealous?" Madame Su came to a sudden realization, and her eyes swept over He eyes intentionally or unintentionally. "So the one you like is the second son of the He family." He Zhe's expression did not change as he watched this scene. His eyes were cold. In that instant, Chan Wenwan lowered her head even more. She blankly looked at the wet bluestone path in front of her. As early as when she first entered the capital, she already liked that young Master He who could handle any situation with ease no matter what. She knew better than anyone that the woman he would marry in the future, if not a noble family, then she would be a princess. Her birth, her family background, she was definitely a match for him. Madame Su saw through her thoughts at that tea party. She said that recently Master He was anxious to find a wife for that person. As long as she succeeded in this matter, not only would her father's official career become better and better, she would also be able to enter the He Manor as she wished. But this trip to Hidden Spirit Temple, she discovered that no matter how high she climbed, that person would not have her shadow in his eyes. Based on what? If she lost to someone else, then forget it. An ugly woman who was banished from the family without power or influence, and even that face was enough to turn people off, was able to make that person treat her so differently. She couldn't accept it. She thought that as long as she got rid of this ugly woman, she would have a chance. But she didn't expect that everything was just a dream. Now she woke up from her beautiful dream. He simply couldn't remember the young girl he supported at the tea party. Now when he looked at her, the disgust in his eyes made her wish that nothing had ever happened. Chen Wenwan had never regretted it as much as she did now. She trembled as she waited for the retired emperor's fury. Madame Su was very satisfied with this Chen Wenwan's understanding of the big picture. She raised her head and said to the retired emperor, "Retired emperor, now the matter is already very clear. It was only jealousy between children that caused this Chen family's young miss to do such a disgraceful thing." The retired emperor didn't speak, but lowered his gaze. Hellion Vivian smiled. She never thought that this matter would completely drag down Madame Su. If it was that simple, she wouldn't have established profound heavens. She understood Madame Su's scheming more than anyone else, as well as the Su family's position in the imperial court. Even if the instigator was Madame Su, Chen Wenwan still wouldn't expose her. This was a very obvious matter. Because in the Dragon War Empire, the four great clans' power was expanding. This made Chen Wenwan worried that after she told the truth, the Chen family would be exterminated. Madame Su was indeed smart and knew how to use power to oppress people. But what she didn't understand was that it was precisely because of this point that it made the retired emperor even more brooding. How could the retired emperor allow a power that was faintly beginning to suppress the imperial family? And what Hellion Vivian wanted was precisely this result. In the future, if she wanted to take back the Hellion family, she would have to face the four great clans. Just based on her own power, how could it be enough? She had to drag the retired emperor over as well. Hellion Vivian raised her head. When she met the retired emperor's scrutinizing eyes, she suddenly stared blankly. She seemed to have understood something in her heart. She actually forgot that if she did this kind of thing, the retired emperor would very likely perceive her purpose. As the saying goes, this monarch's experience was more than the salt they ate. How could he not see the twists and turns in this matter? But what made her puzzled was the retired emperor's attitude towards this matter. The retired emperor looked at that dark little face that revealed a blank expression. He felt that it was a bit like that little seventh grandson of his. His heart also softened, thinking that in any case, he wouldn't be able to persuade that ice-cold grandson who kept his word. Since he started speaking just now, that ice-cold youngster had been standing by his side, sneering from time to time. It was obvious that he wasn't happy. He was already so old. Basically, everything he did was for the younger generation. Since that precious grandson of his had a choice, no matter what his purpose was, he would just follow his wishes. Right now, he actually had a bit of hope that that ice-cold youngster sincerely wanted to marry this girl, and not for other reasons. Chapter 192. In the past, when he saw this girl, he had a very bad impression of her. It was probably because all women were like this, they only had feelings in their hearts. At that time, this girl's heart was hung up on that marriage agreement with the Morong family. Everything she did was a joke. Seeing her today, the retired emperor felt as if he had just met this girl. She advanced step by step without panic. Most importantly, even though she was young, she actually knew how to weigh the pros and cons. Most importantly, she was affectionate and righteous. If Old Third married her in the future, he would also live a happy life. The retired emperor had also thought about who would be suitable to spend the rest of his life with his grandson, who had a temperament as cold as ice. After thinking about it, there were many with good family backgrounds. Perhaps he wanted to warm up his heart, but there really weren't any. For so many years, the retired emperor had always been worried that Beligaju would go astray and become a tyrant. After all, that kind of temperament was unfathomable. It was indeed suitable to be an emperor, but it was too cold. It was as if the people in this world were not important to him. Everyone said that to be an emperor one didn't need feelings. Yes, if an emperor had feelings he would have ties. However, that didn't mean that he had to be an extremely cold-blooded emperor who monopolized the world. If that was the case, the ones who would suffer would be the common people. The cold brat needed such a person who could soften him up occasionally. This kind of person couldn't just rely on naivety and innocence. In the imperial palace and the imperial court, there were too many temptations. The slightest bit of carelessness would cause one to fall into a trap. This girl had to be firm but not hard, strong but not barbaric. She had to have her own perseverance to not be easily swallowed up. Until now, he had only found this sign in this girl. When the retired emperor thought of this, his expression relaxed a lot when he looked at Helene Vivian. This made Helene Vivian somewhat at a loss. Then she inexplicably touched the bridge of her nose. What did the retired emperor's inexplicable satisfied gaze mean? It had to be said that Helene Vivian had a pair of eyes that people naturally liked. Although her face was a little dark, her eyes were very dazzling when she was smart, and very cute when she was in a daze. The more the retired emperor looked, the more satisfied he became. In his heart, he had already classified Helene Vivian as simple, honest, and intelligent. Withdrawing his gaze, he placed it on Chen Wenwan's body. This emperor will ask you one last question. Is everything you said true? Yes. Chen Wenwan bit her lip. She knew that her momentum was already lost. Kneeling on the ground, she didn't even raise her eyes. These matters were all done by this humble girl alone. It has nothing to do with anyone else. The retired emperor's expression was indifferent. Someone come, take her away for this emperor and put her in prison. She will be dealt with when we return to the capital. Yes. The secret guard accepted the order. The retired emperor continued. Write a letter to the emperor. Remove Chun Hui's crown and send his entire family back to their original place. Within 7 years, they are not allowed to enter the court. When Chen Wenwan, whose eyes had originally darkened, heard these words, she suddenly turned her head. Retired emperor, what does this have to do with father? You want to deal with him. How did your father get to this position? When the retired emperor said these words, his gaze swept past Madame Su's back inch by inch. This emperor knows in his heart. Your father also knows in his heart. Chen Wenwan stiffened. Her gaze wavered as she looked at Su Yanmo. She clearly wanted her to plead for leniency on behalf of the Chen family. Su Yanmo didn't say anything. She didn't even look at Chen Wenwan. She maintained her original position without blinking. In that instant, Chen Wenwan struggled and wanted to shout something. However, she discovered that her throat unexpectedly made a sound. How could this be? Chen Wenwan struggled to move forward. Recalling that she had just been in contact with Madame Su, she suddenly understood something. That small face twisted to the extreme, as if she couldn't wait to chew up Madame Su and swallow her whole. She actually believed that as long as she didn't give her away, she would protect the Chen family. She didn't expect that from the beginning. What this vicious woman wanted to do was to silence her. Chen Wenwan felt her entire body's meridians ache. She couldn't even cry out for injustice before she was taken away by the secret guard. Su Yanmo saw that the only person who could possibly threaten her had become a death warrant. Her thumping heart could be considered to have settled down. When she looked at the retired emperor again, she also relaxed quite a bit. Retired emperor is brilliant. She didn't expect that the retired emperor would only look at her indifferently. His bearing didn't diminish. As for the Hellion Jiaoer, as a student of the superior compound, her conduct is not upright. Indiscriminately she slandered others. Tomorrow, let her stay in this hidden spirit temple's firewood shed to properly reflect on where she was wrong. When she finally understands, then she can return to the capital. Hearing this, the Hellion Jiaoer trembled from head to toe. Abruptly, she turned to look at Madame Su. She couldn't stay here. This was a temple. She was a young girl who had yet to be betrothed. If word got out that she was staying here, what would happen? Would there still be anyone who would marry her in the future? What's more, when would she have thought it through? The martial chi competition was about to begin. The winner would become the third princess consort. This was something that the retired emperor had promised her in front of everyone. His words were golden and couldn't be changed. She was the one who wanted to win the championship. If she was trapped here, how could she participate in the competition? The Hellion Jiaoer panicked. Her pair of limpid eyes were filled with uneasiness. She looked at Hellion Vivian with an unprecedented malevolence. It was all because of this cheap woman. If it weren't for her, the retired emperor wouldn't have made such a decision. The retired emperor had always praised her. He even revealed that he wanted to make her the third princess consort. Now all of this was ruined by this cheap woman. The Hellion Jiaoer bit the tender meat in her mouth. Her fingertips were imprinted into the palm of her hand. Madame Su was afraid that her beloved daughter wouldn't be able to bear it. She reached out and pressed down on her arm. Suppressing her sullenness, she said, "What the retired emperor said is right." This time she was too insensible. She was warm-hearted, but she didn't expect to fall into someone else's trap. "I ask that the retired emperor consider my brother and the Defense Division residents and punish her lightly. The martial chi competition will be held soon. The elders have already chosen Jiaoer to represent our Dragon War Empire. I ask that the retired emperor carefully reconsider." When Hellion Vivian heard this, she couldn't help but admire Madame Su's intelligence. If she had used other things to pressure the retired emperor might have punished the Hellion Jiaoer even more severely. But if it was the empire's honor, even the retired emperor must consider the overall situation and reduce the punishment for the Hellion Jiaoer. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to explain himself in front of the common peoples. Sure enough, the retired emperor's long eyebrows wrinkled. It wasn't difficult to see that he was enduring silently. Madame Su knew that she had made the right bet. The corners of her mouth curved up. Just as she was about to smile, she heard a sentence from the flat bottom. "Since it's like this, then let the madam take the place of her beloved daughter to receive the punishment." Chapter 193. Two voices sounded at the same time. One was Hellion Vivian, languid and indolent, with a smile on her lips. The other one was Bailey Jiaju. He was tilting his head. His silver face was as perfect as an ice sculpture. He slowly rolled up his sleeves. The corners of his mouth curved into a devilishly cold smile. His voice was low and sexy, but it also carried the indifference of indifference to the world. Hellion Vivian didn't expect that the royal family would have the same thoughts as her, turning her eyes to the side to look at the man. The third prince, however, had an indifferent appearance, only raising his eyebrows at her. Head Abbot Fangzhong glared. What did he say? This girl was just a little similar to this stinking brat. Look, all of the methods that were mentioned were exactly the same. It was shocking. The retired emperor was also stunned, then laughed. "Then we'll do as Hellion Vivian said. Let Madame Su take the blame. The retired emperor is wise." Hellion Vivian looked back and saluted without being surprised by honor or disgrace. Su Yanmo's grip on the Hellion Jiaoer tightened. Her eyes filled with hatred. Making her, a first-rank madam, stay in the temple to abstain from meat and recite Buddha. If this wasn't extraordinary shame and humiliation, what was? She forced herself to calm down, looked towards the retired emperor, and was just about to speak. Hellion Vivian interrupted her. "Madame Su, don't tell me you also have a test to compete in?" Su Yanmo breathed slowly, the corners of her mouth stiff. No. Was this little vile spawn deliberately using her words just now to block her? She was already so old, how could there be a test to compete in? Hellion Vivian acted as if she didn't see Madame Su's anger, her voice indifferent. Since that's the case, the mother should repay the child's debt. Nothing could be more suitable. Hellion Jiaoer was so angry that her teeth were itching. She really wanted to raise all the martial chi in her body, directly rush over and slaughter Hellion Vivian. But on the surface, she only held Madame Su's hand, shaking her head back and forth. "How can I let my mother take the blame for me? The one at fault is clearly me." Both her eyes were red, her eyelashes drooping, stained with a layer of moisture, unexpectedly giving people the feeling that they couldn't bear to look at her. Hellion Vivian knew that Hellion Jiaoer was acting again. However, as matters stood, no matter how she acted, she couldn't hide the fact that she harbored evil intentions. Everybody wasn't a fool. Through this matter, they more or less knew that Hellion Jiaoer wasn't as magnanimous and naive as she appeared on the surface. Of course, some people would still be mesmerized by her appearance, especially those young masters of aristocratic families who loved beauties to the extreme. Wei Wei straightened her collar, tilted her head and smiled. Then younger sister's meaning is that you want to stay in the temple by yourself? This kind of filial piety is indeed touching. Hellion Jiaoer was choked by Hellion Wei Wei until her complexion changed. She bit her lips until they were bright red. She angrily clenched her teeth. How could she possibly mean that? What she thought was that if she cried a bit, maybe there would be someone who would help her and her mother plead for leniency. After all, the people standing here were all young masters from influential families in the capital. There were quite a few people who were on good terms with the Su family. If they opened their mouths, retired emperor would have to think a bit more. But before anyone could say anything, this bitch blocked all of her escape routes. This time she really didn't know what to do. Hellion Jiaoer clenched her hands, looking at Su Yanemo at a loss. Mother, Su Yanemo closed her eyes tightly, and when she opened them again she weighed the pros and cons. Her daughter was highly valued by the four great families. She would definitely be rich in the future. If she was punished today, she was afraid that she would never be able to wash away the humiliation in this lifetime. Moreover, she was already a married woman. Even if she lost face, it would be like needles piercing her flesh every time she went out in the future. But that was only a small matter. As long as the Su family was strong enough, no one would dare to talk about it in front of her. Just like how she dealt with that bitch Hellion in the past. Therefore, Su Yanemo chose to protect her beloved daughter in the end. She lowered her eyes slightly, hinting at something. Jiaoer has grown up to be like this. It's all because I, as her mother, didn't tell her that people are unpredictable. If Madame Su still refuses to forgive her, then let me take her place to suffer. On the surface it seemed like she was admitting her mistake, but if someone who didn't understand the situation heard it, they would think that Hellion Vivian was not magnanimous enough and insisted on punishing Hellion Jiaoer. Hellion Vivian laughed coldly, her eyes met Su Yanmo's face, pausing after each word. Madam, I think you must have misunderstood the situation. Now it's not that people are unpredictable, it's that Madame Su is immoral and wants to frame others. Madam, are you saying that the retired emperor's judgment is unfair? Of course not. Su Yanmo's fingers stiffened as she looked at the gaze that retired emperor cast towards her. She was afraid that she'd said something wrong and let retired emperor find an excuse to heavily punish Hellion Jiaoer. Helpless in order to protect her beloved daughter as much as possible, she could only soften her attitude in front of Wei Wei. What I want to say is that you can blame me, and you can also blame your second sister for doing something wrong this time. However, we still treat you as one of our own. After saying that, Su Yanemo only felt that she had lost all face. But what could she do? There was no other way. Things had come to this point, she could only do this. What she didn't expect was that this little bastard would be so eloquent. Even she was forced into a situation where she couldn't advance or retreat. If she had known that she would become so restless, she wouldn't have thought about the little bit of Hellion blood in her body that year and didn't eliminate this little bastard completely. She only destroyed her martial chi and broke her meridians, thinking that she would be fine after becoming a good-for-nothing. When Jiaoer needed to advance, she could extract Hellion blood from this good-for-nothing at any time, and anywhere to help Jiaoer break through the bottleneck quickly. Now it seemed that she shouldn't have left this troublesome little bastard alive. She should have killed her just like how she killed her mother. That bitch. Hellion Vivian's gaze fell on Su Yanmo's pair of eyes filled with malice, very lightly laughed. Madam, you think too much, I have never blamed you all. It's hate. I can't wait to turn all of you into ashes as a sacrifice to the hundreds of loyal souls of the Hellion family, who were persecuted because of the change of ownership of the family. Madam has taken care of me for so long. I still want to repay her kindness. That year, when you made my mother so angry that she fell ill and left, I will let you have a taste of the same feeling. What's there to talk about forgiving or not forgiving? This is only the beginning. If I don't expose your true colors and force you into a dead end, how can I be worthy of the humiliation you have inflicted on me all these years? You're really treating me like an outsider. This is only the beginning. I only slapped your face once and lost face once. How is that enough? What I want is for your Sioux family to pay the blood debt in blood. Just wait until I rise little by little and empty your Sioux family. At that time, your expression will definitely be interesting.